Hey everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Back with my boy Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, fellow history soul brother. What's up, man? How you doing?
Everything is good, my dude. How are you?
I'm ready to get some people mad today, like because it's one way or another. People are just gonna get mad because we're talking about current champions of today versus
Mhm.
champions of yesteryear, and what would happen, what if, mythical matchup, whatever you want to call it. But you brought up this topic and I thought it was great, not because it would make everybody mad, but it's interesting because we encounter it constantly as the kind of history type of fans we are or whatever. So people are going to get mad one way or another, I think.
Absolutely. And it's one of those type of basically like, the thing that always fascinated me as a kid when we had different articles growing up in like Ring Magazine, KO Magazine, Boxing Illustrated. Again, like we had so many abundance of them, so you always got to name all of them, right? World Boxing and then boxing insert whatever year it was at that point. Um, you know
Yeah,
which one?
boxing 88, boxing
Yeah,
89.
Boxing
Yeah.
95,
Yep.
96, 97, all the way to the early 2000s. That was a good magazine, by the way. I ain't even gonna front. But and they, you know what made those things cool too? Not to get off track, but like they all just had their own distinctions. But
Mhm.
anyways, one thing that each of those magazines would eventually do is that they would always have one of those pieces, either like once a year or twice a year, where they would do an article comparing guys from historical fights or like whatever mythical matchups for each division from like heavyweight down to flyweight, or they would pick a particular superstar, for instance, like a modern guy, and have him go through like who's who in history, how he would fare up against them. I remember it happened with Oscar De La Hoya. They had it with Felix Trinidad. I remember one with Pernell Whitaker when I first got into the game. Mike Tyson, I know, was a subject of many of those. It's a thing that as long as the game has been around, it's always been fun to try to pick fighters from different eras and try to compare them and match
Yeah.
them up. Because it's just the easy fun. It's the easy sometimes fun. Whatever reason, it gets really heated because people take this shit way too seriously. But it's a fascinating debate because there is a contrast in errors and styles and how people match up and how active people were compared to today and all kinds of other variables and factors, how many divisions they were in, and all a lot of stuff goes in. But like it's just one of those things that's fun to talk about. So here we are.
Yeah, dude, it's something that's been going on forever. Like, as long as there's been a boxing era, as long as it's been around, so that there have been players per era or whatever, they've compared how would so and so do against so and so. Or well, so and so's good, but they're no comparison to fucking Yankee John Doodle fucking over there. There was a that's what fighters were named and shit back then. But no, it's
Thank you
been going
so.
on. It straight up, when a very notable Irish fighter. But yeah, Yankee Sullivan. How's he Irish? But he was Irish. In any case, I know that's like that one fucking scene. Yeah, kid New York. He was from Philadelphia. Fucking naked. It was a great scene. Anyway, sorry, we're getting off track, but it's been going on forever. This kind of comparison of eras and styles and old fighters versus fighters of today. One of the really notable ones for a number of years, basically until Muhammad Ali came along, the biggest one was Jack Dempsey versus Joe Louis. That was like the shit. Like everyone was like, that's the ultimate fucking. And then Muhammad Ali came along, and that changed a lot of shit. And also on top of that, there was great heavyweight eras, etc. But that's what we're going with today. We're going with these kinds of comparisons, and I think one of the popular things that we've heard in recent years, especially probably in the last 20 or so years, I would say, and it's gotten worse and worse, has been, well, athletes they're better now. They're faster, they're stronger, like there's
Mm.
more better nutrition and training is different and stuff like that. And I mean, I guess there's probably some truth to that. Like, I guess just to address that, there's some truth to that, I think. Obviously, that we know of, human beings are running faster than they ever have, lifting more weight than they ever have, you know, able to run longer or for a longer period of time than they ever have, at least that we know of and everything. How much of that is organic? Probably fucking not a lot, to be honest. But nonetheless, though, you could still, not all of it is theoretical because you can look directly back. For instance, I mean, it'll be dated by the time I actually post this, but today is the anniversary of the rematch between Ad Wolgast and Battling Nelson, which went 40 rounds. But the thing is, Ad Wolgast fought 40 rounds or more, like a handful of times. And that was not even like outside normal. So you take things like that and you're like, oh, well, look at these fucking athletes, these fast twitch, blah, blah, blah. And they're so great these days. Those motherfuckers are like winded after round 7. They're done. And I'm not, I know that, probably after like round 30, and a lot of these fights, these fools were like just clubbing each other and there was nothing. But I'm just saying, like, motherfuckers were winning fights. So it's kind of like, I don't think that these kinds of comparisons, there's going to be sweeping generalities from a lot of fans of today's fighters that go, that's stupid. You can't compare eras because fighters are so much better now. I'm just calling bullshit. Like, I just don't think that's the case at all. And on top of that, as we've discussed, some of the earliest fighters that we can find in the teens, 20s, 30s, there are a whole lot of fighters from those eras who would do just fine stylistically these days.
Absolutely, man. It's a long conceived thing that like everyone kind of looks at a photo of John L. Sullivan or like Corbett and them like posing like this or doing, the bare
Yeah.
knuckle guys. They just think everyone walked
Even
in.
into like the 20s and 30s, guys
Yeah,
posing like kind of like this and shit. And you're like, dude, do you think
dude.
they fought
Yeah.
that way? They posed for photos, dipshit.
Yeah, like I just think of whatever, like a dude like I don't know why when he posed like that, I think of Bearcat, right? Because there's a photo of him wrestling where he was like that, his claws up. But very true. These guys would pose in certain ways, but that's not how they actually fought. And if you look, for instance, off the top of my head, a guy Mike O'Dowd, right, a former middleweight champion and a deep cut from the early before the days of Harry Greb as
You
champion.
guys better look on
Like,
BoxRec and look at his record because that shit might
yeah,
surprise you.
and not only that, look up his fights with which one was it, Mike Gibbons or Tommy, like one of the Gibbons brothers, and absolute brilliance right there. You know what I mean? That type of shit holds up into any different era. It really is. Like clearly the graphic, I mean, the footage of it is a little grainy. It might be moving a little bit faster, so you like, but like watch that or watch anything from like Barney Ross, Tony Canzaneri, any of these guys. Like these guys were just legitimately badasses that would last and whoop ass in any era,
Yeah,
right?
they do totally fine today.
Even Joe Gans too. You think these guys from the olden times, if they were dropped in today, they wouldn't know how to adapt or do anything either? Like these were brilliant minds who literally ate, slept, and breathed boxing 24/7. But I mean, I'm not saying anything that the people that listen to the show don't already know. So
Yeah, dude. It's well, and it's easy to kind of get carried away too, obviously, because we know that basically, it's easy to get carried away as a history person because
sure.
we love the history, we love looking back on different era, blah blah blah. But I think that we're pretty, at least compared to a lot of history types, we're pretty objective. We're also recognizing that there are a lot of great fighters today. Like we're not those types of history guys that go, there's no fights anymore. They don't do that anymore. And it's like, perhaps not as much as they used to, sure, but dude, there's some fucking awesome shit now. And it gets clouded by a lot of, ridiculous media nonsense and like the streaming type of shit and the way that boxing, absorbing boxing has transformed in the last few years. That's definitely making it like the judgment about that kind of clouded, I think. But anyway, I think we should have a lot of fun today talking about who who could do what and who can't do what. You suggested earlier bringing up, the heavyweights.
As a
Why not?
start, yeah.
Why not? I mean, I was even thinking about this the other day, bro. Tyson Fury, it's
Mhm.
has been going on 9 years as the lineal heavyweight champion.
Holy shit, has it been that long?
Dude, I know. And that's what it's that makes no sense at all. Anyway, like, well, that's
I
a
mean,
real
what a very flawed and asterisk filled,
what
you
a
know,
piss poor
leadership.
championship run.
Like, yeah, man, there's so many potholes in that thing that can be like questioned. But yeah, like, 90 years. Wow.
God, I mean, let me just, I mean, am I pulling that out of my ass? Hold on here. I need to check dates because now I'm kind of like, hold on. That doesn't sound
So
right.
Klitschko was what, 2015? That sounds about right.
Yeah, dude, November 2015. So in November, it will be 9 years.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's like 9 months from now. But still,
I got an interesting story about that fight too. Is that I
well,
was
any story is more interesting than the fight.
yeah, absolutely. I was where was I working? I was working in Canada that night for Showtime. I don't remember what card it was, but there was something going on. If I have to gather, it might have had to be James DeGale or somebody. That sounds about right, right? But anyways, he might have been fighting Butte. I don't know. One of those guys was out there. Maybe Stevenson. Who knows? Regardless, during dinner, all me and Lee were going back to the truck, and I was like, I think I can find a stream of the fight because this was like the early days of Twitter, and people were posting streams or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't, I wasn't
That shit
watching.
was pretty loose back then. Yeah.
Yeah. So found a stream, X out of a bunch of pop-ups, finally got it working. And as we were watching it, like, and clearly, like you said, it was boring, but it was still fascinating to watch. We're just watching. And as both of us were starting to comment, saying like, oh shit, like, Klitschko looks like he's in a little bit of trouble here. More people started gathering. Like the Showtime people started gathering. They're like, oh, really? So they started like, filtering over because they were like, oh, HBO guy is losing. So they started filtering. Before you knew it, we had like over a dozen and a half people like kind of surrounding our entire like desk watching the fight just to see what was unfolding there. Just see Fury win. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
From a tactical perspective, the fight was not bad. Like figuring
Well, I
out.
mean, just to see how it was unfolding because Klitschko had been so dominant for so long, so to see him so flustered like that, and like you said, it wasn't exciting, it wasn't anything, but just to see it unfold the way it did and see that Fury's weird, unorthodox style, as ugly as it was actually working to his advantage, was fascinating in itself. So,
Yeah. Well, and I don't think a lot of people had a whole lot of faith in Tyson Fury for a number of reasons going into that fight. And he put it together as far as game plan. He basically like hit Vladimir Klitschko like 10 times and then fainted him the entire night. It was like, wow, this is awful, but I get it. But I mean, that in and of itself, I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of like the crown jewel performance for him. And I mean, I say that unfortunately because obviously Vladimir Klitschko had been around a long time, was fairly long in the tooth, had never had a great chin. And so that was always going to be a liability for him, the worry about, concern about taking a punch and stuff like that. And so I don't want to just immediately shut down any talk about Tyson Fury even being good by calling his best win shit or something like that. But nonetheless, dude, there's a lot of asterisks on that win. And then on top of that, on top of the asterisks on the win itself, he took almost 3 years off after winning the title, retired, quote unquote, however many times, and then fought, God, I can't even remember, Sefer Seferi,
yeah.
and then Francesco Pianetta. I mean, we're talking about a full 3 years between Vladimir Klitschko and the first Deontay Wilder fight, where the dude almost got planted 6 feet under a lettuce patch by, two wild shots. I don't know, man. I'm not trying to just like immediately crap on the guy. There are a lot of fighters, I think, over the course of history that he would have been able to frustrate at his best, but you can't depend on. That's the problem. Is like the consistency is not really there overall. And Vladimir Klitschko is his best performance. You kind of got to look at it as like, all right, are there a lot of other heavyweights who can figure out what to do about the feints? Yeah. Are there a lot of other heavyweights from history who would not have been like, oh no, he's fainting me. I guess I can't do anything like Vladimir Klitschko did. Yeah, there's a lot of heavyweights from history who would have done that shit. So it's kind of tough, dude.
Who are you thinking about? Who would you think about in a mythical fight with him that you've always been like, wow, that'd be fascinating?
Well, I mean, God, that's a good question because if I tried to pick somebody else like big, like I don't know, like Primo Carnera or something like that, dude,
Oh God, no,
he didn't
Jesus.
have the skill for Tyson Fury, and he would have been like, like pawing at him all night. It would have been awful. That would have been terrible too. But like, fine, fuck it. Like Joe Lewis, just go for a big one. Joe Lewis, right? Okay,
Mhm.
that's not fair because Joe Lewis would knock his ass out. Sorry,
Some
but
people might say no, but I mean, just because of the, like you said, of the modernism and all that. But yeah,
well,
that's.
and people are like, oh, he lost to
Well,
Schmeling, and then he got knocked out by so and so,
but
and
I
he got
mean,
hurt
no,
by
like,
so and
all
so.
right, let's think about that for a minute. A guy like Joe
Sure,
Lewis,
break it down more.
Was not a big heavyweight by compared by today's guys, right? What was his height again?
He was like 6'2", 210 or something. Like he was not a big guy.
But you got to keep in account too. He did fight big heavyweights of his era. Like he didn't. Now it wasn't like he was fighting. He was fighting guys of similar stature, sometimes even a little bit smaller, like Billy Conn, for instance, or like Jersey Joe Walcott. But like he was fighting dudes also fucking giants. Like Buddy Bear was a huge heavyweight in himself that would fare comparatively well with the sizes of today's heavyweights. Primo Carnera, like guys like that, and Lewis chopped them down like they were logs. Now, if you want to put, their skills in comparison, of course, they don't add up to like a guy like Fury. Like, Bear was the lesser known brother of Max, and Primo Carnera is, well, in history shown what he was. But it's like, a guy that was just manufactured and made up by the mob. But Lewis is just one of those guys too that was like he's one of the most technical fighters in history. Comes up from Jack Blackburn school and just everything was just so precise with him. You know what I mean? And the thing about him though is that he was also kind of slow of a foot. Like he had fast hands when he got in there, and his combinations were absolutely perfect. But he could be out hustled. Like Billy Conn was running circles around him, and I'm not going to say Fury would be able to do that either. But a guy that's mobile as Fury and the size of him would be something that Lewis had never encountered like that, like the combination of the two. So that would be kind of fascinating.
No, I think that's pretty fair, dude. Because Joe Lewis was not a fast guy, at least not his feet. His hands were okay. I don't think his hands were super slow. But one of the big things that, well, I would say two big things that Tyson Fury has never really had to deal with is a fighter who was willing to throw in combination. And Joe Lewis is one of the greatest combination punchers ever.
Mm-hmm.
And not just at heavyweight, but just a fantastic, fluid. Uh, I can't remember who said it initially. God help me if it was Burt Sugar, but somebody said that Joe Lewis threw his right hand like a pitcher throwing a fastball,
I've heard
and
that.
that's how all of his punches looked. They were effortless. Like he sometimes would get pissed and put effort into the punches, but usually it was just like bop 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 bop. He'd get them going. So
And
Tyson
everything was
Fury,
so perfect though, like just textbook, man.
and that's sometimes a problem. Sometimes that's predictable, and sometimes you can time fighters like that, but it's also a big danger standing in there with a guy like Joe Lewis who could have knocked Tyson Fury out for sure. And then the other thing is Tyson Fury basically doesn't in this era, and this is something to consider from most perspectives here, is that heavyweights in general and Tyson Fury too don't really have to worry about body punching because it just doesn't really happen.
True.
Not compared to other eras. And compare that to Joe Lewis, who damn near fucking bent Max Schmeling in half with one shot to the fucking, kind of to the back. But hey, shouldn't have turned his back, bro. Shouldn't have turned his back. But
I mean, man, he broke his spine with that punch.
yeah, like there aren't too many copies of the film with sound. Most of them have been scrubbed, but the ones that do have him going, like he gets hit and goes, ah.
It'd be tough. All right, like if I'm gonna go with off the top of my head, I would have to say that Lewis in 15 rounds would be able to figure him out at some point. But that being said, I could see a scenario where Fury would be able to flurry and awkwardly do his jab, and just probably get dropped at some point, but just do enough of his awkwardness and everything else and leaning and finding enough of rhythm to beat him over 12 rounds. Don't hate me, historians for saying that, but I could see that scenario as well. But if we were going over 15 rounds, I think Lewis catches him by round 13 at least, maybe even earlier. Maybe earlier, but I say like in the late rounds, if it goes in a 15 rounder, I think Lewis would catch him between 13 and to 15.
Like probably some, since we saw Fury against Wilder three times, we have a pretty good sample of like, seeing how he would do against a puncher. Granted, Deontay Wilder's kind of benefits from his unorthodox approach, actually, because it's kind of tough to see where those punches are coming from. They're
Sure.
weird, sometimes windmilling and wild and crazy. But even so, it's kind of like, well, at least my thought process is like, if Deontay Wilder can catch that dude substantially over the course of three fights, I kind of feel like Joe Lewis probably would too, and cleaner and better.
Totally.
But I could envision a scenario where he loses a decision too, because he
I
could
mean,
be
like,
outmaneuvered.
yeah, I think that would be the lesser scenario because, like, again, you got to think Fury's been caught by other guys too, like Ngannou, even though he's a lot bigger than those guys. And clearly, Fury wasn't taking that as seriously as he would be against, someone he actually respected, which, he didn't respect Ngannou or his skills at that point. But getting caught, he can be caught and he can be dropped. I mean, Steve Cunningham, who no one's going to compare him to the power of Joe Louis, anyone on the planet. Again, I was ringside for that. That's the loudest I ever heard a ring shake is when Fury got dropped right in front of me. Just,
Yeah, he went down hard on that one.
bro, the whole thing, it sounded like a thunderclap. Just everything shook around you. And that was one of those, okay, that was one overhand right. So, I mean, if that was a Joe Louis shot, he's not getting up from that. But we're talking peak versus peak, and this is like Fury that's clearly focused and knows what he's up against and knows how dangerous a person is and try not to get caught with some shit like that. I can see him doing all that stuff to eke out something. Because Lewis could be befuddled. Lewis could be outbought. Like, you know, when awkward guys can give him issues. Like you said, you know, the way he was shuffling things like that, like there would be times where he would struggle. But once he got going, it'd be a wrap. So
All right. Well, then how about Tyson Fury versus Muhammad Ali?
mm,
Yeah, that's kind of like you start thinking about the styles and you're like,
that wouldn't be a fun fight. Oh man. I mean,
oof.
especially like 70s Ali. You know, like
There
mid
would have been
70s
so
Ali
much
was that
holding and
better.
hitting and
Oh yeah, yeah. Like, you know, but I mean, if you're talking about the actual Ali of this prime, then Fury's not gonna beat him.
yeah, there would have been, I think, a little too much speed, a little too much
Absolutely,
maneuverability.
absolutely. Too much maneuverability, too much everything. And like Ali was a totally different fighter than in terms of
But
Lewis.
you thought the same thing I did. I was like, oh shit, dude, they're gonna just fall into each other and go.
It's just, I mean,
"Bleh."
like, you know what I was thinking for whatever reason is that like I wasn't thinking peak Ali from like um the Cleveland Williams fight, for instance, where everyone calls him, you know, the absolute best performance or whatever, right? But like thinking of like the Jimmy Young fight or something. Oh God, that would have been the most awful aesthetically. Ugh.
Yeah, dude. I mean, and that's it. Obviously, was not like peak Ali was different, and he moved a lot through a lot of combinations, even if a lot of them were kind of like ineffective. But nonetheless, that was part of what kind of kept him, difficult to hit and difficult to kind of pin down. But like later on, Ali was a lot of those fights were tough to watch, dude. A lot of them were real
They
tough to
are.
watch.
And that type of and that Ali would struggle actually, I think today with today's heavyweights, like the top peak of them, like the mid 70s Ali. I'm talking so the Ali from the 60s up until the Joe Frazier fight and even post that, like for a fight or two, in my opinion, would wipe up a guy like Fury, he would wipe up Joshua, and a Usyk fight would be really interesting. I'm not even gonna front. Like I think I would favor obviously peak Ali over Usyk, but like if you talking Ali that lost in the first Norton fight, or like, you know, other instances where you see Ali just kind of like, you know, going through like the Bonavina fight where he was cleanly struggling, things like certain Ali fight, like that would be a more fascinating matchup. You know what I mean? Just because Usyk was his size, he has beautiful movement, fluidity, everything like that. That's a fascinating fight to me. But the Ali of the mid 70s, I don't know how he would deal with those guys. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people in the era at that point in history that I think could mop up Ali at some point during that time. So who knows? But if we're talking peak versus peak, Fury's not doing nothing with him. Then, you know, that
Yeah.
being said, one fight that I would find fascinating since I just brought Usyk up, um, two of them actually would be one I was thinking of yesterday would be Usyk against Joe Frazier.
Huh. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Joe figures in weird, dude, because he's got a very strange style. Like, I mean, a pretty distinct style too. Fairly one-handed. There were some fights where he used his right hand and did it pretty well, but like, yeah, you almost got to figure like, I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, he's limited. He's got his left hook, and that's pretty much it. He's gonna wind up bobbing and weaving into shots a lot," which is true. But you also kind of have to apply that the other way, which is that he got as fucking far as he did being just that fighter.
Yeah.
And he got really far. Like, he defeated as close to peak Ali as he could possibly have defeated. And, that in and of itself puts him in on a level that, most will never even fucking sniff, much less reach.
True.
But yeah, against somebody like Oleksandr Usyk, dude, that's
Okay. I'm
oh, I
trying
don't know.
to look up Usyk's height and I'm trying to look up Frazier and just see like,
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be Usyk trying to back away, And Usyk's probably like, I don't know, maybe has like an inch of height on him or
Yeah,
something.
nah. So Usyk's 6'3", Frazier was 6 foot.
Damn, okay. All right, a little bit more than I thought, but yeah, I don't know, dude. I mean, Usyk is definitely more of a pinpoint puncher and a guy who doesn't waste a lot of energy. That seems to be kind of his game, and it's a good game. You know, it's a highly effective game, and it seems to be more kind of like a long game at heavyweight where he's beating like a lot of the fighters that he's fighting at heavyweight. He seems to be beating them up over the last few rounds, type of thing. You know, outlasting them, being a more precise fighter and definitely a better conditioned fighter than the vast majority of heavyweights today. So the thing is, like, I think with Joe Frazier, we'd be looking at a scenario where like he's got to cut Joe Frazier up. You know, he's got to slice him up with
Yeah.
precision. He's either gonna or take him out and hurt him, or if he gets to the later rounds, dude, I think Joe Frazier in the later rounds, assuming he's at his best, is going to be a real tough out for anybody.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't see Usyk hurting Frazier that way and taking him out. Like Usyk's a sharpshooter puncher, but he's not a fucking concussive puncher,
He ain't
especially
Foreman.
yeah, exactly. All right. The only people that were able to really take Frazier and drop him on his ass hard were like Bonavino, who was like a caveman clubber. And that was a young Frazier too, who was more just like kind of, I think, shocked and like stunned as opposed to being like, oh my God, completely out on his feet when he got hurt in that fight. Correct?
He got dropped twice, and I
Yeah.
think that like the second time he was a little bit wobbled, but the first time it was kind of he was just like, oh shit, like
Oh
he got
shit.
caught in
Yeah.
a very weird spot. But
I
like
just wanted to
but he
confirm
did
because
get caught.
you're the Bonavina expert, but like, so you got that. And then yeah, Frazier was hurt in other times, like, most notably besides the Foreman fights, like the second Ali fight where they talked about what was it, Tony Perez, I think, cutting the round off early.
Yeah, fairly early. I was like the second round or
Second
something.
round, exactly, because they said Frazier might have been knocked out, which who knows? I don't think Frazier could
Yeah, I
get
don't know
knocked.
about knocked out, but he was definitely hurt.
He was definitely rocked around and wobbled, absolutely. So he could be hurt. You know what I mean? He was wobbled. Other dudes certainly hurt him and rocked him at different points in his career. And not to say that Usyk couldn't do the same, but I don't know if he'd be able to hold off a relenting Frazier to be able to knock him out. It's just a fascinating matchup to think because they're not that far apart in body sizes, similar like that. Frazier's probably thicker than Usyk actually was. Usyk is one of the most, fluid and best heavyweights in terms of skill wise we've seen in a long, long while. Beautiful fighter to watch and can get down and is tough and gritty and just to know to get down with a pressure fighter like Frazier, those styles would clash so perfectly together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd probably go with either Frazier late or maybe like, I mean, I
I'd
guess
have to go with Frazier. I can't go against a guy like Frazier. I think he'd eventually catch up with him. His pressure is too much; it would just suffocate him after a while. But it would be brilliant to see because I think he'd have to come from behind to do it.
I think that Usyk would have to like slice him up or like he'd have to
Yeah.
do something like that, in my opinion, to like in order to. I mean, I guess he could take a decision, but that would be tough, dude. You make it a 15-round fight, and I think it's a long night for Usyk.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think Frazier eventually takes him out, but that would be a really really interesting fight.
What about like, even though he didn't turn pro, but what might be like a really fun stylistically, like in terms of skill and tactics or whatever, would be like Oleksandr Usyk versus somebody like fucking like Teofilo Stevenson.
Sure, I was even thinking Stevenson against a guy like Wilder.
Jesus, dude. Because I mean, Stevenson was so skilled and then could fucking bang.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
that
then
shit
like
would be
if he
fun.
turned pro, and I don't know, like a guy like Wilder, who Stevenson clearly was more skilled than, but Wilder,
But he
and
wouldn't
I'm
have
not
run from
talking
him.
about the
Yeah.
more recent one that fought Joseph Parker, did absolutely nothing. I'm talking about the dude who was
Oh yeah,
quick
that was
twitching,
bad.
trigger, and would throw like you said. You couldn't predict how he was going to move, and he was awkward, and out of nowhere he would just wing a shot that can knock your head off. That would be that
Like in
fight's
the third fight where he just out of nowhere caught Fury and like his whole body like did the ripple and shit.
yes, yeah, yeah, just shook around like a weird like
Like that episode of The Simpsons where he touches his stomach and it just keeps going forever.
sure, yeah. When you hit him right on the top of the head, but
Yeah.
you know, a guy like Teofilo Stevenson, who from when he first won his first Olympic gold medal all the way until he retired in the mid to late 80s, there are instances where there's certain fights or like certain matchups couldn't be made in the Olympics where you're like, oh, for 84, they weren't there, right? 88. I don't think Cuba competed either. I think that was the year that around that time that he finally retired. So those are both times that, who knows what Stevenson would have matched up with. But over the years, he proved himself to be one of the most greatest amateur fighters in boxing history. Lost a couple of times, but he always would end up avenging his losses more or less. And just anytime he showed up at the Olympics, I mean, he was just laying dudes out, especially the Americans. Dwayne Bobbitt got splattered by him. John Tate got splattered by him. Anytime in like usual amateur tournaments, even if they were able to get a win against them, they'd end up getting, knocked silly in a rematch. Um, it was just over and over and over. I think he even knocked out Tyrell Biggs later on, who ended up winning the gold in '84. So like it gives you an example of like what kind of badass, you know what I mean? And all those years, especially in the late '70s into the up until almost his retirement, there was always that talk of what if he's going to turn pro? What if he's going to turn pro? There was close to it a couple of times. Bob Arum, I think it was the one that was cultivating it, where they were going to have a series of exhibitions with him against Ali. Um, all over the place. And I forgot who like cut it off, but like it's one of those things. It's the biggest what if. You know what I mean? In terms of amateur fighters, that probably has the biggest horror of what if. No,
Yeah, it's probably the biggest, and probably a lot of the biggest what ifs have been Cuban fighters. Felix Savon,
yes,
Teofilo Stevenson. Um, those are probably the two most prominent ones because so many other fighters have either defected or tried to defect. Um, but I mean, I'd say probably the other one would be like Laszlo Papp, even though he did turn pro. He was stopped short of probably winning some kind of championship at some point. I mean, so that's a pretty big one too. But
totally
nonetheless,
agree. Man. Totally agree.
and also, one of the highest quality amateur fighters ever. But
Made the Hall of Fame. I mean, think about that. More
yeah,
so off of his amateur accomplishments, because, like you said, his not to veer off too much, but like his pro career was spent. What was he fighting out of Vienna, Austria? I think it was, and he fought in other areas of like, but he fought a good amount of like European fighters, won the European Championship, and was on his way to a fight with Joey Giardello, and that's when they were just kind of like, yeah, you're done now.
yeah, unfortunately, a lot of bad actors around that time with Cuba and a number of Soviet countries basically cut off any sort of access to professional sports, including boxing. And so Laszlo Papp got ex-nayed from that shit, unfortunately. But like you said, there's been a lot of recognition that he was a great fighter. Teofilo Stevenson, though, is probably the farthest up there because he was, the original, at least heavyweight gold medal, fucking gold medal snatcher. Dude killed many a dream for sure. But like, yeah, dude, there are a number of different fighters, different fights along the way for for that dude that would match up. I think really interestingly, Usyk has kind of got that style where he did really well in the amateurs, and he's been able to carry that over into the pros, similar to Usyk, but they have the same, coach. So I guess that's not really that surprising. But yeah,
I'd favor Usyk in that fight against Stevenson, to be
dude,
honest.
Usyk's I think he kind of gets lost in the conversation, especially because his last fight. What did you think about his last fight, by the way, Dubois?
I mean, look, everyone is, griping about the whole body shot low blow thing. That was a low blow when it comes down to it, all right? And he got up and took care of business. I don't think he looked at his absolute peak, and he might be even slipping slightly. You know what I mean? Like, it's been around a long, long time. And, but I mean, we'll see how he really looks for the Fury fight. It's unfortunate it didn't happen recently, but like, I feel this is the fight he knows. This is his legacy, all right? Like he brought his the absolute game of, A game against Joshua two times. Had to suffer some big adversity in both of those fights, especially in the second one when Joshua tried to come back, before he ended up taking it over again. And I think he knows what he's up against Fury. So like, yeah, whatever he looked like in this one, which wasn't bad, but it wasn't like amazing in itself. I think, he's gonna bring it even more to a different level for this one, next one. So
Yeah, I didn't have a big problem with a lot of the British fans especially were jumping on the whole low
course
blow
they would.
thing, and I just didn't see it as that big of an issue. I saw it far more borderline, so I don't have that's not the kind of thing that's gonna affect me going like, "Well, I don't know how I could pick Usyk against so and so from history because he went down from that low blow," you know? No.
Yeah, Fury looked like shit in his last fight too, and he generally doesn't look amazing half the time. So it's kind of like whatever, you know.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it, but
But
I think that we're both agreeing that Usyk is skilled enough and hits hard enough that he'd match up pretty well against probably most fighters in history.
absolutely, but I think he would beat Stevenson for the fact that even as amateurs, it was just like the styles are different. Like Stevenson, as great as he was, he was kind of economic, you know what I mean? Still in his approach and everything like that. Like there wasn't a lot of just, you'd see him and twitching and switch hitting or whatever it was. You saw what that was. He would just kind of walk in with a jab and everything was great how he threw it. Like he was, you know, textbook. But like you can see that like in my opinion, if there was a guy really out there, like a guy like Usyk, for instance, who just, good with the legs and movement and everything like that, could befuddle him a little bit and just move on him and make sure they don't get hit with that right hand. As long as you avoid that shit and try not to get caught with nothing crazy, there's a good chance you can outpoint him. And Stevenson could be beat, like, at the Olympics, he was almost unbeatable, basically. But like there are times, especially later in his career, where he would lose. So, I mean, it's just too bad that we didn't get the chance to see how he could have turned as a pro because not even talking about the Ali fights, which everyone has debated about over the years, verbatim, over and over and over, what could have possibly happened, especially in 78 and 79 when the talks were hottest and Ali was more or less retired and just, doing exhibitions with Lyle Alzado and other bullshit like that. Um, Stevenson against a host of the guys that he beat up as amateurs, guys like Michael Dokes and Tubbs and Page and that crop of fighters and other heavyweights they were still around. And even like, Larry Holmes and Ken Norton and stuff. Those are fascinating fights to think about. So
Yeah, for sure. Dude, I mean, I think that the overall kind of theme, and we'll have to see what happens for Fury Usyk, which we'll get soon enough, I think. But I mean, the overall theme is that like we don't really seem to have a whole lot of confidence in Tyson Fury for good reason. His consistency has been swirling down the drain for a long time. It just never really was there as champion. And then, compared to Oleksandr Usyk, who seems, fairly consistent skill wise, output wise, you can rely on the kind of performance he's going to give usually. And I think that that's a pretty big difference when you are trying to match this fighter, versus that fighter type of thing. But I mean, I don't know. Who do you think is somebody from history that would take Usyk out, for instance?
oh, in history, uh,
I mean, I'm
man,
sure there are many, but I'm just saying,
yeah,
like,
like,
who's somebody specifically that you think would be like, oh, well, that's just no good for him.
hmm. Off the top of my head, Larry Holmes, I think would be a tough fight for him.
No, that's actually not a bad answer, dude. That jab is going to be real fucking
Exactly.
tough for anybody.
Yeah. A prime Larry Holmes is just a tough out for everybody. He was just not only was he just tough as nails and you weren't going to take his stride away, but like, yeah, his jab and everything else and his combinations. Like Holmes, doesn't get. I mean, just his jab gets talked about so much that it's forgotten about how good his uppercuts, right hand, and everything else. How he would throw body punches at times. Like Holmes was a gritty motherfucker, man. He just there's a reason why he became one of the all-time greats. And like people like to talk shit about the 80s and the division that he like resided over or whatever it may be because it was post Ali and the dark ages or whatever it was. But like that was a tough era. Holmes had to go through some tough fighters at that point. Yes, he beat some scrubs like Scott Frank, Lucian Rodriguez, totally greenhorn Marvis Frazier, who had no business being in the ring with him, and like a few others. But like at that point, you think of the other guys too, like Ernie Shavers, who almost ripped his head off. You know what I mean? Mike Weaver, who was finally coming into his own, and a young Tim Witherspoon, and Bone Crusher Smith, and other guys that he had to like just he beat the hell out of. You know what I mean? And he beat them convincingly. And he wasn't, and sure, like he could have fought a guy like Greg Page or a couple of others, but I mean, more or less, he proved himself to be like the legitimately the cream of the heavy, the crop of that era until he finally lost to Michael Spinks. So it's like, and then, if you consider his comeback as well and seeing, the skill and how his brain reacted and everything, how he gave everybody hell in the 90s during his, his comeback. he's gonna be a hard out for anybody. I think if you're gonna put someone with him, Usyk's not gonna beat him.
Yeah, dude, that's I think a pretty good pick,
That's
dude.
just him. I'm sure there's a lot of other. If I really thought about it, I can give you a bunch of other ones as well. But just off the top of my head,
I'm going with Frank Slavin. No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
right.
No, I think that's a pretty good fucking pick, dude. Especially because some of the fighters that Larry wound up fighting, they like overperformed. Like they had no
Yes,
business fighting as well as they did. And
but they
somehow
were
they
just
like they fucking reached down for it against Larry Holmes for whatever reason. Some of them, not all of them, but
no,
some of
and it would
them.
be like some of them, and they would become dramatic performances. Look at, for instance, Ronaldo Snipes. All right, look, Snipes is no one's going to consider to be one of the all-time great heavyweights. He was a tough contender there in his era that clearly had a ceiling to himself. But when he caught Holmes with that right hand, and then Holmes got up and walked face first into that pit, into the ring post over there, looking confused
That
and
was bad. That would
not
have been
knowing
stopped
where the
today.
hell he was. What do you think Tony Weeks would have done? The minute he got dropped to the canvas, he would have jumped and said, "Oh, no more!" Right?
Yeah, and it would
So
have been some dramatic, like facing the camera. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like freaking out. All right. That wasn't, Holmes got up, and not only did he get up from that looking all dazed, he was beating the hell out of Snipes at the end of that round. Same thing after he got dropped by Shavers. He said he had no idea where he was. Anybody would have been basically dead from that
Dude.
point.
Yeah,
Holmes,
easily one of the just fucking brutalist knockdowns that's just like loud. He
it
caught
just
all of it.
it sounded
Oh.
like Barry Bonds hitting a bat, just or like a wrestler when you hit one of them savate kicks with a loaded pad, and you hear, "Pow!" He got up from that shit. So I mean, Holmes was a different type of animal.
Yeah, you were not, unless you were Mike Tyson and he was called in like in 3 weeks notice, you were not going to keep
Exactly. Yeah.
wearing.
While he was sitting at Easton, just chilling around and looking at the stocks of his disco hall or something like that. Well, come on.
Yeah, you aren't going to keep Larry Holmes down otherwise. And so, yeah,
And
I think
even
that's a
then,
pretty
man,
good
in
call.
round four, Holmes was still talking shit and doing the dance around and getting everybody excited because he looked like the Holmes in 1978.
Dude,
Oh,
yeah, I remember in the 90s when he was still doing his thing and it was just like, how the fuck? What? He looked like he definitely put on weight and he didn't move super great, like especially his upper body, but he was still doing it.
and the thing is, if you saw him at the press conferences too, he had the very stylish Cazelle glasses on, made famous by Run DMC and others from the '80s. But like they were thick, it made it seem like he couldn't see. And then he had the weird high top that was a little misshapen. And
Yeah, it made his head look even weirder shaped.
it
Yeah.
did, yeah,
It's the
yeah,
bad stuff, bro. Go back to your short hairstyle.
yeah. And like you said, he had the gut, but he would wear he used to wear, and then during the '90s, the early '90s, he was wearing bum equipment. Do you remember that brand?
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. He was wearing bum equipment trunks too, which was cool. Don't get me wrong. I mean, right? He looked like he was totally out of place. Like he was really like a dude who was just kind of dropped into the wrong era. But unlike fighters who clearly don't belong, Holmes showed that he belonged. And like he wasn't a guy that was just trying to like, get big fights and stay inactive until he got a big fight. Like he was going on the circuit. I mean, he would get a big fight every few years, but in the interim, you would see him all the time on Tuesday night fights, Mississippi or this place or that place, just beating the shit out of all these dudes, and then saying he's retired after each fight. It became like almost a running stick between him and Sean O'Grady. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that's why everybody know it's my last fight. Thank you all. And then 2 months later, he's back again. So I don't think he ever fought this guy, but like someone like Tony La Rosa. You know what I mean? That's a name for the blast from the past for people. But
Yeah, good. Like one of like Bigfoot Martin's last fights or something like that.
yeah, something ridiculous, exactly. But um, let's move to light heavyweight really quick.
All right.
Um, current champions Dimitri Bivol and was it Arta?
Yeah, better beef.
Yeah, better Beef. So, how would you see Bivol doing against? Off the top of my head, Bob Foster.
I mean, the issue I have, the issue I have with Bivol,
Mhm.
and it's not like a major issue. It's more an issue of like exposure because it's like he has a long amateur career. I mean, or at least a significant amateur career. 'Cause he's not like super old. He's like 32 or 33, but like a significant sized amateur career. But he's only had like 21 or something like that pro fights. and we haven't gotten a great look. And granted, we could say the same about Usyk, but I don't think we've seen Bivol like accomplish nearly as much and against as good a fighters. And his signature win at this point is probably the Canelo fight. And so I'm kind of like, I'm not entirely sure how to match this dude up against somebody from history because I'm not entirely sure we have the greatest sample size, but neither with Beterbiev either because he's been really inactive.
I just picked them because they're the current champions. So
No,
it's
no,
like,
no. I'm with you. And I'm not saying it's a bad, I'm just kind of like, I'm not sure who I would pick them against unless it was somebody bad. I mean, Bob Foster, dude, he catches literally any light heavyweight, and I think they're going to sleep.
absolutely. And especially the one that was winging fucking haymakers against Dick Tiger. Like, you've
He
seen
was he was not playing around that evening at Madison Square Garden. He was going
it
for
almost, and I
sleepage.
don't think the footage was sped up because it didn't look like it. It just, Foster was winging shots that night. And Tiger was, so small, just kind of ducking under him. It must have felt like a tornado over his head before he finally got caught with that one shot that got lifting him off his feet. And, he lay there sprung and dead. But it's like,
And it was one of those knockouts where he just like he didn't just fall, but he like violently fell, and his head was
yes.
like bang, bang, bang. Like oh my god.
I mean, when I watched that as a little kid on that video, the 30 Great One Punch Knockouts, and I had no idea who either one of those guys were, I assumed that Dick Tiger wasn't anything. I was like, who's this guy that's got bounced like a basketball, like you just said? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't, because it was that bad of a thing. It looked like a one, it looked like you're watching an episode of WWF Superstars when you saw a dude like, I don't know, Big John Studd or somebody like that just absolutely obliterate a poor scrub like Special Delivery Jones when they just bounce like 5 feet off the canvas. You know what I mean? Like that's what it looked like. So that being said, yeah, I guess I would go with Foster. Maybe that's the best comparison because Foster's one of the greatest light heavyweights in history. But like I was just thinking of tall, lanky guys to compare with,
No,
right?
for sure. And it's also fair to note, dude, you and I have talked about this too. Foster's era is not super great, like in terms of
It wasn't out.
quality,
Yeah.
but he was generally laying waste. Like he was doing with these fighters what he should have been doing for the most part. Like if these
And he
fighters were
could be
not super.
stretched too. Like a good, a really, really good fighter from that time would be able to take him some rounds. Like Mark Tesseman, who was a really good boxer. I know took him late, and who was another one from that era? There was another guy that he went with. Like was it Finnegan or somebody?
No, I don't think
Oh,
Finnegan
not
lasted
Finnegan.
super long. But like, but yeah, like it wasn't always taking everybody out early or anything like that. But he was pretty dependable for the stoppage usually.
So, all right, a better question would be how would Beevil compare to the golden age, late 70s, early 80s?
I thought you were gonna say Roy Jones era. I'm just
Oh, yeah, yeah. How would Beevil do against Richie Frazier? Ricky Frazier.
Ricky Frazier, knock him out, then arrest him. Yeah, fucking no, dude, that's actually a good question as far as like the golden age, like late 70s, early 80s, light
So,
heavyweights,
yeah. So, for instance, like, could you see Beevil beating up guys like Marte Parlov, John Conti,
like Marvin Johnson.
Lopez, Marvin Johnson? Yeah. Saad Muhammad.
I mean, dude, I think Saad Muhammad unfortunately gets sucked into the brawls so much that like and he used to get cut real bad too. Like he had an issue with cuts. That's two pretty big strikes against him against somebody who's a little bit better schooled like Bivol.
I
So
can't see Beevil getting caught up in some shit with him either.
I could, yes, yeah, like especially if it's like late in the fight and Bivol's like, I got this well in hand, and Matthew Saad Muhammad pulls out one of his miracle Matthew moments. That shit could be pretty
Well,
fucking
I mean,
wild.
Beevil did get hurt against Joe Smith at one point, didn't he?
That yeah, he did. That's true. Yeah, and that almost kind of looked for a minute. People were like, "Oh, is he kind of fragile?" Like I think since then he's taken a couple where it's like, "Okay, I think he's okay." He kind of got caught weird, and Joe Smith can punch a bit, but even so, dude, that was a hellish period for light heavyweight, bro, and a lot of really good fighters like Marvin Johnson. Even Marvin Johnson, really, really good fighter, but still got overshadowed by a couple of just better fighters. I mean, just some
Think
one of
about
them just barely better.
Marvin Johnson was a three-time light heavyweight champion and only managed
Dude was really good.
one title defense out of three reigns, which is
And he
crazy.
also managed to only grow hair on one side of his head. I'm just kidding. No, no,
Yeah, he's
that's
better
he
off
was
when
a
he
very
shaved
good
that
fighter.
and became old pops when he was only like 33 or something.
Yeah.
But
But I'm not talking shit. I'm just saying.
oh no, he was. Listen, it was one of those eras that like I think Bevo would favor well in it, and I just don't, like the very very top guys. Like I think he'd lose to Spinks, as
Yeah.
I think Beterbiev would lose to Spinks, but Spinks is an all time great at light heavyweight.
Yeah,
But
skill and power at light
at
heavyweight.
the same point, I could see Bevo boringly outpoint Kawi just by negating the style that Kawi had. But it would just be a very awkward and not fun fight to watch because he wouldn't be trying to take a lot of risk against him, rightfully so. Kawi would be trying to get in, but wouldn't be able to break through as much as he'd want to. And it would maybe resemble a Spinks fight, but just you know.
Yeah, dude.
And
I
then
think you put
good.
somebody with a little bit better skill in that era. I think that they're probably going to do well because there was a lot of wild shit. Now those fighters were tough, a lot of really great fights, but and I'm not going to say they weren't skilled, but they, the kind of styles that could be, controlled a little bit, and people might be able to do that. Beterbiev, though, I think his power
That
might
oh
add it.
my god.
What's that?
He would have that would have been incredible for him in that era because he would have fit in so well and his
His
style
punching
would have
power
made
adds an
some
extra element for sure.
incredible his style would have made for some wild brawls for that time. All right. For instance, if you put Beterbiev in with James Scott, who we discussed in the last show, for the 4 rounds that fight would last at the most, that fight would be a barn burner, right?
Yeah, dude, the
Um,
inmates would have been going nuts.
yes, everybody would be going crazy in that place. Rahway would be burnt, going down to a crumble from the excitement because Scott wasn't going to back down. He was going to get right in his ass. Beterbiev would love to take that and then just go right at it head to head. And then I think Beterbiev and his, better technical skill would break him down. But for that would be a ridiculous 4 or 5 rounds. Um, he fit in well with Yaki Lopez, who was just tough as nails. Could box as well and probably would last until the mid rounds before he finally got broken down and stopped. But I mean, that would have been an absolute barn burner in itself. Um, excuse me. The fight I can't think about that would salivate over would be him and Kawi.
Yeah, dude. Well, I mean, like anybody who is able to take Beterbiev's power, even if they didn't have big power themselves, dude, that could have been just a fun fight because it would have just been it would have been a brawl. Yeah, Howie against anybody who's willing to come forward is going to be fun.
And Kawi is one of those dudes too, very like everyone kind of thinks, oh, he was a brawler. He wasn't a brawler, not at all.
Yeah,
He
he's
was
a
more of
teeny guy.
a
He had to know how to box.
yes, he was a tiny guy who could out jab you from being only 7 foot and boxing out of a crouch at light heavyweight. And then he would get in there. He was tough to hit with a clean shot, and he could counter the shit out of you with his right hand while he was smiling through that giant mouthpiece of his and just beat you up. And it looked like he was torturing you and enjoying it. And there was nothing you could do about it. He was really good and depth at slipping inside your shots. Like he wasn't that easy to hit. And if you're going to hit him back then, you couldn't get him with the cleanest shot. By the time, it really started falling apart for him is when he moved up to cruiserweight and he started getting, bigger and bigger. He even still won a cruiserweight title then and gave Holyfield the best fight the division's ever had. But one of the best division. And then so think about that. But that fight,
Here's a pretty good matchup, in my opinion, a pretty good matchup. What about Bivol versus Eddie Mustafa Muhammad?
fascinating style. I favor Bevel in that fight.
I mean, yeah, I think Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, dude, he had problems making the weight for a while, kind of
And his
inconsistent
passivity
with a few
too.
of
He
his
had a way
performances.
of Muhammad, if you read a lot of articles over the year about him, if you watch his fights, the dude was obviously supremely talented, gifted, in fact, in some ways. You know what I
Just
mean? But
inconsistent sometimes.
it was consistency with him and just passivity and other things. Like he just didn't,
Yeah, he'd
the
like take rounds off where he just like wouldn't throw, and it'd be like, the fuck is
just
he
wouldn't do
doing?
shit and anything. And you know, he was one of those guys that he was around a little bit before the golden age really came in. Like he was,
Yeah, he missed
well,
it by just a bit.
I mean, he was in it, but he was already there in the early 70s. Like he was one of those guys that even before Saad Muhammad and them started coming on, in the late 70s, like he fought Saad early on and beat him by decision. But he was one of those guys that was already he was a part of the era of Galindez, right? Post Bob Foster and then the Galindez era that kind of segued into the late 70s where Marvin Johnson, Saad Muhammad,
Yep.
Michael Spinks came in and the rest of them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he was kind of caught in the very beginning of those newer guys coming in or
Yeah,
whatever. And it,
exactly. Like he was already a veteran by the time they started. By the time everyone else started coming in, but he still
yeah,
was able to put it together. And if you were able to see the brilliance of him, you watch his fight with a guy like with Marvin Johnson when he won the title. Brilliant fight. You know what I mean? Brilliant performance by him. He put it together that night. And this was after this point. When you think about it, he had already lost a few times, including a title fight to Galindez in the mid 70s. He had a long career that, compared to guys of this era, would already be like on the verge of maybe retiring, or being on the end of it. And then he ends up finally winning a light heavyweight championship, by stopping Marvin Johnson. And then when he loses it to Spinks, that was a competitive fight too. Like he
yep.
was doing really well early on before he claims he got thumbed or whatever it was, but his eye blew up. And then Spinks, took over the way he did, and he lost the decision. His career never really gained the momentum it should have after that. Like he still had some memorable knockouts, but if not memorable wins, like remember Lottie Mawali, another contender from that era,
Mm.
knocked the shit out of him. Poor guy.
Yeah,
You know,
unfortunately, he was on the receiving end of a few bad ones.
Look, man, I like Mawali. First off, I just like his name, Lottie Mawali. It's just fun to say.
Mhm.
And he was a tough fighter. He was a good fighter. He beat Marvin Johnson, in fact, actually, as a pro. And, I forgot exactly what country he was from Africa. I have to look it up again, but he was a really, really, maybe it was Zambia or something. I don't know. But he was a tough guy, like a really, really tough guy.
I feel
And
like I should know that. I don't know why. Yeah, Zambia. You're right.
cool. So tough guy, you know what I mean? Like who had a solid, he was undefeated when he fought Saad, but yeah, he became a highlight reel. You know what I mean? Because not only does Saad knock his
But just one
mouthpiece
of the
out,
most dramatic uppercut knockouts you'll ever see.
the way he puts his hands up Ali style after he knocks him silly is just kind of like, damn.
Well, like even the punch and because he goes like whoop and like winds
Yeah,
up, and then the way he just like it's so fucking dramatic. It
yeah,
looks
it's bad.
not real.
And then when he fights Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, he gets hit with a shot and like he kind of turns away. And I think Muhammad catches him with a hook and just again knocks his mouthpiece out. The guy couldn't keep his mouthpiece out. It just lays there completely unconscious again. So yeah, he had a few. Anyways, he had a few good wins, but and then that led to it was supposed to be a title fight rematch with Michael Spinks, and that was a whole fiasco in itself too with weights and stuff, right?
Yeah, there's a fun story about that where Burt Sugar, I almost
Oh,
even hesitate to repeat it. It's more funny than anything. But Burt Sugar claimed that he found some bag of flour or sugar. I can't remember what it was, but some sort of like he said it was like a 4 pound bag of flour, and that he put it on the scale and it said 3 pounds or some fucking weird thing. And
yeah.
so, long story short, Spinks and Eddie Mustafa Muhammad were supposed to rematch. And at the weigh-in, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad came in. Muhammad came in heavy. His team and him were all like, "Oh, what happened? We were on weight," and they were claiming the scales were fucked with. Brit Sugar and some of the other people in the media were claiming that it was true, that there must have been some sort of blah blah blah. And the whole thing about it was, I'm sorry, I gotta say this before we move on. Fucking Marion Barry, mayor of DC at the time, because the fight was supposed to be in DC. His wife was the one who was the inspector overseeing the fight, and so people were like, and she later on was indicted for some shit, like some super shady shit. And so people seized on that and were like, oh, it's shady. We knew it was something, something. So
What a power
anyway,
couple they were then, huh?
Yowza, bro, yeah, jeez, Yowza.
You
Anyway,
remember when
but
they made fun of Marion Barry on The Living Color? That shit was
of course,
funny.
yes, dude, I remember that entire scandal, bro. That shit was fucking ridiculous. Got caught on video. Fucking, oh God, come on, bro,
Anyways,
do
yeah, yeah.
better. Awful. But no, so yeah, like that whole fiasco basically was kind of the downfall of Eddie Mustafa Muhammad there. And it was also obvious that he was having trouble making the light heavyweight limit before that anyway. But yeah, I think that would have been a fascinating matchup just because Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, a lot of people remember him as like a puncher. He was a stylist. He was definitely kind of a more of a boxer puncher type guy, but a stylist.
And a stand up fighter too, like
Yeah.
the stand-up style. So I think I would favor Bivol. I think he would just, it wouldn't be the most exciting fight because they'd be like posing and watching and studying each other a lot. There'd be a few bursts here and there of them trying to break out, but I think that Bivol would do a little bit more to eke out a decision. Um, better be against that crew again would be absolutely fascinating. I could see him breaking down Sod and being able to eventually stop him late, just because of the way he is, his precision. I don't think he would get caught with some shit early on, maybe even hurt a drop, but like I think he would just break through and eventually get through to and stop him. But it would be a breathtaking fight. Excuse me. Kawi, I don't know. That's a tough one because again, Kawi has one of those styles that it's not just walking in and waiting and trying to go brawl for brawl with you. Like they're both technical dudes, so they're gonna butt heads. It's just gonna be like two bulls colliding, but like in a brilliant infighting way. Like I don't think there'd be a lot of clinching. It would just be like a grinding ass fight. And I don't know. That one I'm gonna have a toss up on, to be honest.
Yeah, dude, I think we've seen them. Yeah, see, now I feel bad because right at the start of this, I was like, we haven't seen enough of these guys. We can't talk about this. I didn't mean we can't talk about it, but just that I'm like, I don't know. Because it's tough to say, especially when we're comparing to fighters who professionally fought like 50, 60, 70 times or whatever. And you got a lot of really good looks at them. So, but nonetheless, yeah, dude, I think that skill wise, both of them fit probably in better than, what a lot of people might think.
Sure. I don't know. I think that Better Be would do really well in that era. I mean, could he have won a strap? Potentially, absolutely. I think he would have been a long reigning champ. No. Same thing goes for Bevo. Like it was just one of those eras that like you had a lot of tough guys, and I think they proved themselves to be like a commodity over the types of like Jerry the Bull Barton and Jerry Celestine and other really top contenders are there. Even Yaki Lopez and Jesse Burnett and other guys from that. But like it would just it would be fascinating to see them compete against guys like Spinks and the rest of them. So
I think a lot of history types, not us, of course, but a lot of history fans and shit, they mistake or confuse entertainment for skill. Like, the I'm not saying that the fighters from the 80s or 70s weren't skilled, but a lot of what happened in terms of the entertainment and the thrilling fights, because they were brawling. Not all of them, but I mean, that doesn't the entertainment and thrilling doesn't equal skill. So, in any case, dude, we got to talk about Canelo because if we
that's
didn't
what I was
talk
about to
about,
get to. 'Cause I don't even we got to get the super middleweight now
yeah,
because
shorter
absolutely.
division historically in terms of people to draw from, but still there's some.
Who do you think would for a fight at that division? Who would you match him up with?
I mean, I think the obvious that everyone's going to
Right,
go for it. What's that?
right.
I would say either Roy or Joe Calzaghe. Those are going to be the two that people are going to go for because it's like they probably had the most prominent super middleweight runs thus far, or or the two top that people would point to. Because Roy, that seemed to kind of be his peak. He had grown and started definitely filling out for a middleweight and kind of grew into his power a little bit, but was still extremely fast, still mobile. His like I know he had problems with his knees in the 90s, and so his knees didn't really seem to be fucking up. He was still moving around really well at super middleweight. Beat James Toney, which was a massive win, So I mean, and then Joe Calzaghe is probably considered the greatest super middleweight. I mean, I'm not going to argue with anybody. I don't really agree or disagree. I don't really care.
You don't think
But
it's Sven Aki? The hell's wrong with you, man?
I don't know, man. It could be God. God, and his Spinake's style was so too. God damn, he had like zero. How did he knock out Mundine? How did that happen?
I don't know, man.
Bro,
Mundine was
like
winning
every
that fight
clip of
too.
that has been scrubbed from the fucking internet. I'm telling you. Like every
Mundine
clip
was
of that
winning
shit.
that fight too. Apparently he was
Yeah, he was.
convincingly.
He was, dude, because it was like his like 10th pro fight or something.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, "Oh, he was a pro rugby player." Like that was his whole thing. And he just walked in. What the fuck? We're getting off track, but that was so weird. I never understood that. I still don't get it.
He got knocked unconscious too, like
Like
unconscious.
his head like hit his shoulder, but it was like the lightest punch. How did that happen? Weird. Fucking weird. Anyway,
Play
um
Max Schmeling. I don't know why. I'm just gonna say he put some kind of jinx on it.
it's so fucking weird
Even if he
weird.
might have been dead. What year was that? It was probably early 2000s. So yeah, I blame
They
him.
brought in the same weird witch doctor they brought in for Ray Leonard, Ayub Kalule. That's what they did.
No, it was Livingstone Bramble's witch doctor, the one that was his high school basketball coach. But no, all right. Canelo, here's the fight for me that I think would be very fascinating. Because I think Roy Jones at his peak would slap Canelo up. All right, no offense against him. It's just styles make fights, and Roy's too quick and athletic for him. And like the peak of Roy just would pot shot him the whole 12 rounds and would be a rout. But Canelo against James Toney, the Toney that fought Iran Barkley.
I
I
mean,
mean, I'm going with Tony. I'm going with Tony at a fight. Tony at that
I,
peak was
I would
absolutely,
too. It's
but
man, James,
Tony's not
like
going to move like Roy Jones would move in that fight. So
that's the thing is that you'd have the chance, against Tony, but he had the chin. That's the thing, if he could absorb Canelo's power, which he probably could, so
absolutely would. Yeah.
and so it would be really tough to pick Canelo in that fight, dude, because I guess maybe if he took a decision or something like that, but and then switching back with the problem with Canelo, his output, dude, his output since even fucking 154 pounds, it was less of a problem at 154. But as he started to grow or whatever, take whatever he was taking or some shit, he his output's not good, dude. And I mean, you as one of the CompuBox dudes, like you probably are a little bit more conscious of this when you're watching fights, but he really takes far too many like sequences off. Like he
Yes,
needs to throw
absolutely.
more.
Yeah. And it's almost like he feels like these rounds are just going to be in the bank because of past experiences with him and how he just, he thinks, which his flurries, which everyone has to agree, are accurate. Like when he throws, it's with a
Oh
purpose. It's
yeah.
not like he's throwing not to throw. Like,
He's not
everything.
wasting, yeah, he's not wasting energy.
He's never wasting anything. No punches are ever wasted with him. But like you said, there are gaps of inactivity because of that. And if a guy knows how to take advantage of that, and most fighters don't, Canelo is so brilliant that he could still negate anyone else's flurries just by not even doing anything because he's so good and adept to being defensive. I got to give him that, man. His head movement, everything is pretty brilliant. Like he doesn't really take that many flush shots. Like he can get tagged, but he knows how to, roll with it, lean with it, whatever. Shows he has a good chin. Triple G knocked the shit out of him a couple of times. He took it.
Mm.
That being said, what I mean, like I think that would be a brilliant fight because Canelo likes to fight on the inside. He is, he's not
Mm-hmm.
gonna. And Tony is a guy that's not gonna run away from you. He used his legs a little bit and he was able to, move and stuff, but he was always in the center of
Yeah,
you.
he would have given him some work.
Yes, like Tony was one of those guys that George Benton and others loved because he was old school in the sense that he made you miss, but he was not like running from you. He was still in your in your peripheral. He just made you miss and he was still working and still beating your ass while he was making you miss. You know what I mean? And it was no clearer than in the Barkley fight. Like Barkley was one of those
Yeah, he
guys,
chopped him up.
obviously pedestrian fighter, like in terms of skill, but I mean relentless, ferocious, hit hard as a mule.
Three division champion.
Tommy Hearns twice. You know what I mean? Like,
Three
yes,
division champion.
for a guy, a very, very tough guy and should be on the ballot. I don't know why he's not on the Hall of Fame ballot, regardless of whatever happened to him out that Canastota or some shit. The fact that he's not on the ballot, as Van Otke's on the ballot, Artur Gregorian, and that's a whole other discussion for another time. But like the fact that he's not and others are is ridiculous, whether you vote for him or not. But at that point, he had beaten Tommy Hearns in a rematch. He had knocked the shit out of Darren Van
Let's
Horn.
never talk about that again. But that's true. He did.
Did the only person that beat Tommy Hearns by decision, correct? I hate to say that, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My boy. Look what they
It
done to
looked
my
like the
boy.
Elephant Man at the end of the fight too, man.
Oh man. Yeah. Like he really was not super far in the rematch, but he just for whatever reason that clubbing style, he just couldn't get past it.
Yeah. But Barkley was riding a high, and James Toney as middleweight, even though, he was considered one of the best fighters in the world. And I'm not sure if he was already put in that video game before he beat Barkley or not. But Legends of the Ring, Boxing's
Oh
Legends of,
yeah, that's right.
because it was all middleweights. So I'm almost assuming that he was put in it before the fight. Because I don't. When did that game come out?
I'm about to look it up.
Yeah, look that up because I'm actually curious now. One of the greatest games of all time, by the way.
So that was 1993.
Okay, he beat Barkley in '93, right? So
Yeah, so I guess depending on when it came out.
they probably were in production of it before he beat Barkley, I would assume.
Yeah. Of course, it's tough to look up because now there's like 50,000 boxing legends and legends of boxing games. Well, in any case, yeah, that's pretty. And that was that was the one that was sponsored by the Ring. That's right.
It was a great game. I mean, that fucking game still rocks today. But anyways, Tony that night that he beat Barkley, that's one of the most brilliant performances I've ever seen in my life. Like the way he just slipped and everything, and the 4 or 5 punch combinations. And when you saw him as middleweight champion, like, he was already considered one of the best fighters in the world. But at that same point, it's like he was struggling to make weight. So some of his performances were affected somewhat behind, like because of that. Most notably, Dave Tiberi, who everybody universally agrees got robbed in that fight against Tony. And
Drake Thods.
I think
Actually, that
that's
was
his.
light heavyweight, but yeah.
No, that was middleweight.
No, I
Dave
was I
Tiberi.
was about to say Drake Thodsy, but then I was like, no, I think that
Oh
was
yeah,
light
no,
heavyweight.
Krasny beat him, but yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's
Well, I just
like,
meant like looking like shit, but
no,
yeah.
yeah, looking like shit, yeah. And like other ones too, he just kind of looked, meh. Where Glenn Wolf, Tony Thornton, like he won those fights comprehensively, but it's just kind of
Yeah, and those were dudes that Roy Jones was putting away.
badly, yeah. Poor Tony Thornton, but you look at a fight then against, how he looked against James Tony. Not James, excuse me, Jesus Christ. How he looked against Iran Barkley. And that was his most brilliant performance. I mean, he just
Yeah.
chopped him absolute bitch, bro. Like it was efficient. Any fighter, like a guy like Eddie Futch and all the old timers were just sitting there marveling and just sitting there with tears in their eyes, watching it like, oh, that's how we, remember it type of deal, right? And I think that like he would beat Canelo, but that would be like a fascinating fight to watch in the sense that like like the boxing acumen of both guys, and the fact that like Tony wouldn't be running away from him, so Canelo would be able to get shit off. But it would just be brilliant to see Tony slipping and sliding and trying to counter whatever you have to do. And that being said, I see Tony winning at least like 116, 112 or something.
We get so not us in particular, but especially with like the conversations about boxing on social media these days get so like smushed into like a binary type of like conversation where you talk about Canelo, for instance, and
Mm.
it's like, yeah, he ain't shit. He's cherry picking, he's manufacturing, he's nobody, and he's not even that skilled either. Or you're a massive fan. He's one of the greatest Mexican fighters who ever lived. And I mean, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of middle ground, dude, where the honest truth is far closer to the middle, where he's actually a very skilled fighter, really skilled, and
Yeah.
he's actually had a very good resume overall. Are there asterisks? Oh yeah. There are definitely asterisks with the fucking rehydration clauses, with the weird catch weights. In some cases, the timing of some of his fights were for his opponents. Yeah, of course. But it's really difficult to deny what he's been able to do in the last handful of years and been able to consolidate the super middleweight belts, which is no small feat, not the greatest thing, but no small feat. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that makes it a lot easier to match him up against some of these greater super middleweights, dude. Somebody, and instead, like Joe Calzaghe, though, I think that might be a really tough style for Canelo, dude, because that's going to be peck, peck, peck all night and shit.
I got to see Kawasaki once live against Roy Jones, and I got to see that peck 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 style like up close and personal, man. It was Kawasaki was one of those fighters that like whether you liked him or not, and like it wasn't a style that got everybody really hyped. I get it. Like some people used to call him Joe Cal Slappy, right?
Yeah, that was, yep, on the message boards. Everybody, Cal Slappy. That's what they called
Cal
him.
Slappy, yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, he had a very awkward, tough style, and he was tough as nails himself. Like he had a very fluid. You couldn't predict how he was going to fight too, some way. And you got to remember, like his dad was a jazz musician, and his dad, even like in interviews and stuff, talked about how he would use how jazz music and kind of use the interpretive, like how freestyle it is over there, and like everything, and kind of interpret and incorporate that into Joe's style, meaning very free formed and like loose, and you ain't gonna predict your
Yeah.
shit.
Improvisational. Yeah.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
go off of what your opponent's giving you.
Totally. Everything off of Jazz is improvisation. And he made his Joe style improvisational in itself. And whether you liked it a lot, or whether you liked it a lot, not, and sometimes it wasn't fun to watch. Like some of his fights were really awful, but when he was able to put it together, Calzaghe was absolutely brilliant, absolutely fucking brilliant. I mean, look at what he did to Jeff Lacey. Granted, Lacey was looking like Mike Tyson on Showtime for a little while at that point, but I mean, Calzaghe shut him down in one of the most complete performances in a big fight we've ever seen since the maybe the biggest, the most complete performance we've seen in a big fight since 2000. I'm not even going to front. That was complete shutdown. One of those that we haven't might not have been eclipsed since Crawford Spence. Like it was one of those just type of like holy shit, you know what I mean?
It's easy to forget. It's not easy to forget for the British fans. They'll bring that shit up every moment. But a lot of American fans forget how much the American boxing media was behind Jeff Lacey going into that fight. And I mean,
And I
so of
get it,
course
man. He was looking
I'd
like a
rub that
mini
shit
Mike
in
Tyson.
too.
He was. Did you ever get to see him back then,
Jeff
Lacey?
Lacey,
Yeah, because I
like I
know he
mean,
was fighting
on
like he was
TV,
on
obviously.
Showtime all the time. Or you didn't see him live or anything.
Oh, I'm trying to think. I don't think that I did, but I might have to look real quick because I don't. Did I see the Ruben Williams fight?
Oh God.
No. I wasn't there for that. No, I don't think I did.
I mean, he blasted my boy Scotty Pemberton too.
Oh yeah, dude, Scott, and he was long in the tooth by then. Fool had been inactive for a while, and
Yeah, Scott. I mean, like, I'm glad Scott got the payday and everything, but he had no business being in there. Regardless, Lacey was looking like an absolute monster. He was, and no one thought that Calzaghe was gonna put on the performance. Like, people thought he could win. Don't get me wrong.
he beat the
No
shit
one,
out of him.
bro, he pummeled him so bad that Lacey was never the same. That career was ruined, like ruined. Lacey got on HBO a couple of more times. Had that, I think his last big fight on HBO was against Jermaine Taylor, where she got whooped on pretty bad. Then he got stopped by Roy Jones, who like looked ridiculous as Captain Hook and kind of faded off into the sunset.
Yeah, and got a threatening legal letter because he was doing Disney characters.
I remember
Hilarious.
that. Yeah. I'm sorry though. There's like that one photo of Roy though holding the glove in the thing. He's just
Yep,
just
and he's even got the wig on and
yeah,
shit.
exactly. You got the wig the
Peter
whole time.
Pan.
Carmen, yeah, man. Get you like really, bro?
Fucking ridiculous.
So
Yeah, dude, he beat the ever loving shit out of poor Jeff Lacey. And actually another also really good performance, even though it was a closer fight, obviously closer than the Lacey fight, was the Mikkel Kessler win, dude. Kessler was undefeated
yes,
and he still went on
absolutely.
to do some shit.
And think about that too, is that like the first 3 rounds, Kessler was landing and looking good. Like he was landing uppercuts, he was
Yep.
landing jabs, and like it seemed like he was timing Calzaghe and his like, rushes and everything. But like you said, improvisation. Calzaghe adjusted, started coming at him from different angles. Kessler, who as good as he is, was a more economical fighter who was clearly flustered by everything coming at him. He just kind of got overwhelmed. And then it was a competitive fight, very competitive, but
Yeah.
Calzaghe clearly won by decision. So I'd have to say the same thing. A guy like Canelo who doesn't throw enough and kind of waits and everything like that, Calzaghe would just kind of flurry and beat him, and it would be a competitive fight, kind of close, but one that Calzaghe clearly wins.
I know.
That
It
being
almost
said,
pains me to say, but I agree with you.
that being said, I'd favor Canelo against Nigel Benn. I'd favor
That
Canelo
crop, yeah, like that, you could just lump them all
yeah,
together. You got Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank.
with
I think
Eubank, Steve
Steve
Collins. By putting
Collins. Steve Collins might beat him.
that'd be a tough fight. That would be a really tough fight. Steve Collins was tough as nails.
He gets
I
forgotten in that conversation, bro. And how?
understand,
He got
and
the wins.
it, it's because the thing is that everybody's kind of groups together. McCallum, I was going to say McCallum, excuse me. McCallum would definitely beat the shit out of Canelo too. Excuse
Yeah, he would.
me.
He'd come up from 154 and whoop his ass.
He absolutely would have. I don't want to hear anything. Mike McCallum definitely would have whooped Canelo's ass. Nothing against Canelo, but that would do is a different beast. But the thing is that Steve Collins kind of gets lost in the mix. Is that Ben and Eubank were making their bones against each other? Like that was the
Yeah.
in the early 90s. And while they were having that rivalry, Collins wasn't there. You know what I mean? Like he was a contender. he was a tough contender too, and a top contender, but he lost a competitive decision to Mike McCallum. He lost a competitive decision to Reggie Johnson, and he was one of those guys that was on the scene. I think he won the WBO middleweight title for like a cup of coffee. I think he beat like Chris Pyatt or some shit, but then like he gave it up to fight Eubank. But by the
And
time
you and
that
I've talked about this before too, and that was back when like the WBO was like real. People were
exactly,
like,
it was only in Europe that they really like gave a shit
yeah.
about it. You know what I mean? It was kind of like the Mars bar. You ever see that in America? I'm being honest. Like, yeah, Mars bar is an underrated candy bar, but I mean, how many times do you really see it over here?
Yeah, you never see that. Nobody who wants a Mars bar. Nobody.
Exactly. So
Give me an
uh,
Abba Zaba.
give me a whatchamacallit. But
Yeah, that's a pretty good one too, to be
it
honest.
is very underrated candy bar, by the way. But by the time Steve Collins finally got a hold of Eubank in, was it 95? And yeah, this was 95 because I read about it in the first Ring magazine I got. They talked about how Collins hired a hypnotist and Eubank got all freaked out by it. Like,
Such a weird guy.
yeah. And ended up losing the decision, which was, definitely a big win. But like he lost the decision to him, and then he lost a rematch and kind of retired for a few years before he would come back against Carl Thompson. Um, and then he moved on to Ben. And by the time he moved on to Nigel Ben had already lost to Sugar Boy Malinga, and he was already a former champion, right? And this was clearly after the Joe McClellan fight, and people already knew he was already like on the back end a little bit. So he beats Ben, and I remember the first fight, I think it was like anticlimactic. Ben just kind of gave up for like an injured ankle or some shit or whatever it may have been. And it's like he beat him in a rematch. Again, Ben got stopped and he quit. He retired. So Collins is kind of left alone at this point in limbo. Roy Jones is clearly the superior number one super middleweight. Frankie Lyles is around at this time. What's Steve Collins doing? Steve Collins is definitely making big money, on Frank Warren cards, and I think he's featured a couple of times on Showtime. But it's like he's kind of left in limbo without like a serious dance partner to like really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was like bad timing on his
It
part. He
was.
just came along at the wrong time.
And even though he was around the same era of those guys, they were just already at that championship level while
Yeah,
he
they
was
already had that shit going on between them.
exactly. By the time he finally got to it and was able to beat them, it was like, well, now I got nobody else.
And
And
back
then
then, they didn't care about like, oh, well, we need the WBO belt too. They were just like, fine, be the
oh, yeah,
WBO
yeah,
champion. Good
yeah,
luck,
yeah.
buddy.
So like, and I forgot the reason why he retired. I don't know if it was injury or whatever it was, but like he tried to
Yeah.
come back. He was gonna make a comeback, and I remember after what it might have been the Ricky Frazier fight. I don't know, but he was scheduled. He was talks to him fighting Roy Jones, and he like crashed the Roy Jones interview. And he was like, yeah, yeah, Roy, come on, we're gonna fight, blah, blah. And Roy just, talking the same shit. But then, like, I think he suffered a brain bleed in sparring or something. Clearly, that curtailed it. But that's why he's underrated, and that's why he's forgotten about because, like, he just came right before Calzaghe. Like, he retired right before he could have fought Calzaghe, right? Eubank lost to him twice. Eubank lost to Calzaghe and then retired, and then came back to fight whatever. And that was it. So who knows? He could have fought Calzaghe but like that would have been a fascinating fight. I could see Canelo beating him by like a very, very close decision, and people thinking that Collins, would have got robbed. I can't see Canelo stopping him. Collins was a rock solid dude. He could have hurt him in the chin, could have hurt, his reserve, and but I think Canelo might have been a little, too savvy for him to eventually be able to outpoint him.
Yeah,
That would be a
Collins,
hell of a fight, though.
Collins, Canelo, dude, just two Irish guys fighting.
Like, but again, I can see Canelo just because of styles. I can see him beating Eubank just because Eubank again would fight to the level of his opposition. Meaning, I think he would, absolutely step it up for Canelo. But like his passivity and the way he kind of was, kind of like Eddie Mustafa, that Canelo would be able to eke by him. Not in a very exciting fight either. Ben would be exciting because Ben would just bring the heat and not give a shit.
Yeah, he'd probably get knocked out trying to knock Canelo out, but
Yes,
still,
I think Ben
be
would get
fun.
stopped in the middle rounds. Absolutely. But it would be a lot of fun in there. Would Canelo absolutely get a rocked at some point?
Yeah,
If it's a
all
draw.
due respect, Canelo's no Lou Gant.
Nah. And then other super middleweights from that era, I Frankie Lyles, Canelo I think would beat him, even though that wouldn't be a fun fight to watch. It would
Yeah,
be like
Lyles is
almost
a
like
great
again
amateur
like
too.
great amateur and a lot bigger than Canelo too, kind of
Mm.
in the same mold of Beevil. But I don't know. I see Canelo just being like, lower tier super middleweights that are out there. But like to talk about the top three guys, even Andre Ward, that would be a fight that I think I would favor Ward in because Ward was one of those guys that was like, he was a chameleon. He knew how to adapt to any style if he necessary and like, work his style toward that. And I think he has more layers than Canelo did and more tricks up his sleeve where he'd be able to like, win an easy, not easy, but a competitive decision.
Yeah, I'm
So
pretty sure he would have gotten the decision over both Canelo and Golovkin when those fights were being talked
yes.
about. I mean, I'm definitely 100% not the biggest Andre Ward fan at all, and I think he's kind of a dickhead. But if we're talking simply in the ring, he was pretty fucking good.
Sure. Middleweight, I don't even know who's at middleweight right now, man. Call me a casual for that point, but I don't even think we.
Um,
Uh,
yeah, Alim Kanuli,
cool.
fucking
All
yeah,
right, so I'm just
Janabek,
yeah,
Janabek.
yeah,
I
down.
couldn't remember his fucking Janabek Alim Kanuli, and
Yeah, Marvin Hagler kills him. Okay, down to junior middleweight.
and Aris Landy Lada, who's like, dude, what?
Yeah,
With all
yeah,
due respect, Lada, come on, dude. He gets caught on the chin by pretty much anybody who could punch at this stage, and it's no.
yeah. So let's skip that. Okay, so we're down to junior middleweight. Um,
Yeah, we're just like, all right, we're running out of fucking motherfuckers to talk about. But I mean, yeah, I mean, going for Jermel
here's
Charlo, Tim
well,
Tim
this is what I
Zoo.
want to talk about. Here you go, Jamel Charlo, Terry Norris. That's one fight I was thinking about.
I mean,
You know what? Here's the thing. I think Norris beats him. Norris, all right. Like I'm gonna be biased here. Norris is I've talked about this plenty of times. Growing up, he was my favorite fighter. I'm always gonna be a big Terry Norris fan. But that being said, like I just think his overall skill set, as aggressive as Norris was, as angry as he was, how he can be in the ring and like lose his head or whatever. There was something about his style that still made him so compact. Like he
oh, he
never
was fast as fuck.
and he
And
never really lost his like skill. Like he never got crazy. Like he never just let himself go where he got
yeah,
wild.
he got wild with the fouls, not the punches.
There you go.
No, straight up though. No, he had
Yeah.
good technique, very good footwork, very fast hands, threw in combination, good power. The obvious liability was his chin. He just didn't take a super great punch. And a lot of people remember, like, they'll go back and be like remembering the Simon Brown fight, that's the type of shit they remember, but they don't remember he made a lot of defenses at junior middleweight and did really well for a long time.
I mean, Norris again, he comes from one of those eras that he came on the tail end of like the 80s, right? So he fights Julian Jackson for the belt
Yeah,
originally.
caught Julian Jackson just at the wrong time, unfortunately. If he would have been like a year later, he'd been okay.
Who knows even at that point too, because Jackson was still a beast around 1990, 91, as Harold Graham found out. um, Jackson got his ass kicked the first round. Norris went in for the finish in round two and, got left with a concussion.
Oh,
Happens to the best.
frozen on the ropes like that. Oh
Yeah, yeah.
man.
Happens to the best of them back then. But like when Norris became champion later on that year, he knocks out John the Beast Mugabe. I think it was in early 1990 he did that.
That
He
was
that's
knockout of the year.
Yeah, he went on a campaign of just kind of beating on the retreads of the 80s. Like knocked out Mugabe, beat up a shell of Sugar Ray Leonard, Donald Curry. I'm not going to put Rene Jucot in that group because, yeah, but, you know, he just beat up a bunch of former champions, right? And on his way to, like, losing that fight to originally to Simon Brown, Norris was a whirlwind, man. Like there was just something about that guy. Like clearly he was angry and had like a Mike Tyson-esque like aura about him of just he wanted to break your face off. But he was so technical about it that made him so beautiful. You know what I mean? Like that he just kept his hands up and the way he throw his hooks and uppercuts and right hands and everything like that. Like, and you could see him slip and you could see him do all that. And Charlo was a good fighter. Don't get me, not acknowledging how he looked against Canelo because he looked like absolute ass in that fight. But the Charlo that we've seen at his peak, and he's a kind of similar to Norris too, I would say, just not as explosive and maybe not as like fluid in terms of like how he can let his combos go as Norris was. But if you see the style, they're both like kind of technical walk forward pressure boxers, right? But I just see Norris being a little bit more faster and a little bit more fluid that he would be able to like outbox him for the most of the majority of the fight if he didn't lose his head, which would be tough because the press conference, both of them would be talking shit, and Charlo would be running his mouth so much that Norris would absolutely try to attack him at one point.
That's true. That would have been a pretty fiery fucking fight, dude, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I mean, dude, Jamel. Yeah, dude, we've seen a pretty good peak from him. I don't. I mean, I'm assuming that we're not going to see anymore. I don't know though. But I mean, at his best at 154, dude, he probably gives a lot of fighters a lot of problems because he's got the kind of style that's like a good mix of boxing and punching that is, tough to deal with. It's tough to outbox, tough to outpunch because he's got a kind of nasty streak himself. He's
yeah,
got some dog in him, so if you back him up, I mean, not so much against Canelo. I like you said, that was just a different. I don't. He fought that like Roy Jones fought Tarver in the third fight, just trying not to get his ass kicked, kind of, and that was not impressive at all. But again, yeah, I think against somebody like Terry Norris, dude, I don't know, his chin is a problem, but Terry Norris also, I think he would have come in there with a plan, dude.
yeah. I mean, the power boxing that Norris did, he's faster on the feet than I think Charlo is, and faster hands. He could get caught. Like, I mean, in between combinations, like we saw Danny Garcia catch Amir Khan that time with the left hook. Like, people can get caught, and Norris could definitely, if he gets caught, he can get dropped. I mean, Norris had a tendency to stay in too much in the pocket sometimes. Especially if he was feeling himself, that's how he got caught against Troy Waters. Remember, he was just right on the inside and just beating the shit out of him, and Waters just caught him once there, and then you all of a sudden you see Norris just go briefly to a knee and looking shaking his head and all that. But like that's what makes that fight intriguing. Like that would have been a firefight, but I would have to favor Norris.
I probably would too. Yeah. So I mean, I'm trying to think of like a pretty good era of. I mean, I think Denny Moyer was like the first 154-pound champion. I want to say.
Okay.
So like it'd have to be after that, obviously. But Emil Griffith, he's somebody who is up there. And I mean, dude, middleweight probably wasn't his best weight. Emil Griffith, that is 147, 154. He's a real tough fighter to deal with without question. And I think that
I mean, he wins the decision over Charlo, definitely.
yeah, I think that he'd probably defeat
He
Charlo.
outworks him and he out shuffles him everything. Like he doesn't stop him and nothing like that. But Charlo's not doing shit with Griffith. Griffith
Yeah.
was one. He's an all-time great. He could take it from the best. The only time he was like completely obliterated and stopped was against Ruben Carter.
When he
Like
moved up, yeah.
he moved up. I mean, he got stopped against Munzon as well, but I'm talking about like straight up knocked silly.
Yeah,
You
that
know?
was when he like almost had no hair on the top of his head anymore.
Yeah, like it was the late 70s. Plus he went in a rematch and almost beat Munzon anyways. But like
Yep.
this was like I'm talking straight up just like obliterated. That was the only time. And Charlo's not doing that with him. Once Griffith got into his zone too, like it would be close for the first few rounds because Griffith took a little bit to warm up. And sometimes, he would be like a little distracted or whatever. But once like Gil Clancy and Howie Albert, kind of slapped him back in the notice and like, get your ass in gear. That was it. That's when he would start pulling away on guys. Especially if the fight was held at MSG, which was Griffith's home. Nah, Charlo was not doing nothing with that.
Yeah. Emil'd smack him around and then make him a hat.
He would. He would absolutely do that. Each round, he would get more stronger because Emil Griffith was the quintessential 15-round fighter. He really was. He was one of those guys that got stronger as the fight went on. And by the time 14, 15 came on, he was really churning at that point. Like he was built for that.
All
So,
right, here's a good one. Here's a good one then before we move on from Charlo. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know how you're going to answer. Charlo versus Felix Trinidad 154.
um, Trinidad might get dropped early. Possible.
Yeah,
Maybe.
it'd only wake him up. It'd only just make him mad.
Trinidad's going to beat the shit out of him, bro. Trinidad at 154 is an absolute monster. I think out of all the divisions he competed in, 147, 54, and 60, 147, 154 was his absolute best. Um, when David Reed dropped him, Reed was more explosive than a Charlo. Like just faster. I don't know. I think Charlo actually might beat Reed if they put them head to head in a professional fight, just because of how their styles played out. Yeah, but Reed was one of those guys that like I mean, the way Trinidad looked at that division, man, he was almost unbeatable. He was a beast. Like that was perfect for him. Everything came together, and it was at 154 where people were wondering, could he beat Ray Robinson? Could he beat Roy Jones? Could he do this? Could he do that? That was at that division where he was just ruining careers. He ruined Reed's career. It took a little bit longer for Vargas, but he essentially ruined his career too, for the most part. Like, nah.
That might have gotten bad.
I mean,
Like I said,
Tito
I'm
at
pretty sure I know
154
how
was
you're
just
going
a
to answer it.
different type of animal. And that's no knock against Charlo. It's just literally Trinidad was an absolute monster at that weight. And like I thought Reed would beat him that fight. I did. You know what I mean? Like I just figured that like I saw how Trinidad looked against De La Hoya and others. I thought that Reed was in his prime, would be able to, was gonna put on a peak performance. And for like 3, 4 rounds, I looked like the biggest fucking genius in the room, right? You know what I mean? He was outboxing him, beating him to the punch. Trinidad couldn't was woofing on his hook and other stuff. Reed dropped him, and then once he got caught and Reed got that stupid smile on his face, like, oh shit, I'm in trouble now. When he got dropped, I'm like, well, there goes that.
Yep.
He has suffered one of the worst ass kickings you can have
Yeah, then
possibly.
he just whooped his ass the rest of the time. It was bad.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd probably go with Tito too. That's just it's
definitely. It's not even a probably for me. I think he knocks him senseless.
yeah, it's the wrong fight.
So,
So
hey, would you? So at one, would this make this at one? Here's one for you: 154 or 147. This is a fight I just thought of. Errol Spence against Simon Brown.
man, I mean, Errol could thump, dude. And
Yeah,
but that's the thing. That would have been fun because that probably because Errol could box. I mean, honestly, Simon Brown could box too. It wasn't like he
yeah,
was
yeah.
only a
He can
brawler.
box.
That probably could have been a fun fight, like a good fight, a mixture of like punchers, but also some skill there.
That would have been a hell of a scrap.
I know
But
there's a lot of
at
people like
welterweight, you want to put Errol Spence at welterweight against Simon Brown that like beat Tyrone Trice and was like going through the rest of the division. That's a fight.
yeah, man. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of fans of boxing now who are going to be like, "That's Errol Spence you're talking about." I'm like,
Well, look up
yeah,
Simon Brown. Simon
I
Brown
don't know.
was an absolute bruiser. One of those guys that came up in the mid '80s, lost a close decision to Marlon Starling for like the NABF or USBA belt or whatever it was, but was
He's
just a
Jamaican, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, but was based in DC though, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. Like but he was from
Jamaica.
Jamaica, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Jamaica. And just a beast. You know what I mean? A dude who like had fucking monster power in both hands, relentless. But like you said, he wasn't just a brawler. Like he could box. There was like precision to his game. He was a pressure boxer, like the worst type of fighter. You know what I mean? And plus, he could take a punch too. Later in his career, when people see him laid out by Hopkins and others, like, well, no, he couldn't. Trust me, some guys lose their chin by
yeah.
the
That
end.
was already several years after he'd
Yeah, I
kind
mean,
of given
if
up.
you take enough dents to the chin, eventually it's gonna crack. So, but Simon Brown in his prime was another guy that should be on the ballot at least for the Hall of Fame, and it's kind of a wonder why he's not. And a beast. So fights Tyrone Trice for the vacant title, back and forth, absolute war. One of the better fights of the one of the best fights of the late '80s. Ends up stopping him for the strap. Goes on a record number of not record, but like a number of defenses, beating the shit out of a who's who of that division too. You know what I mean? Guys like Jorge Vaca, Jorge Massenet, and a bunch of other dudes whooping on them. And loses an upset to Buddy McGirt, who was moving up from junior welterweight. McGirt had a number of wins, but McGirt was kind of thought to be on the back end himself. And McGirt ends up putting on the most, complete performance of his career to beat Brown. No shame in that, especially when a guy of, McGirt at his level, if he's going to put on the best performance career, he better put that on against a guy like Simon Brown, who would have fucking decapitated him, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's the fight where you can't make a whole lot of mistakes, and he didn't.
He didn't. He didn't. Some guys just have that one performance in them where it's absolute perfection. McGirt had that night. It is what it is. But he moves up, you know what I mean? And when he fights Terry Norris, Norris is one of those dudes who, at this point, he's pound for pound top 3 in the world. Some people have him number 1, just depending on where you want to leave
Yeah, it
him.
was
But like,
considered a massive upset.
massive upset. Norris at that point, like I said, the last time he had lost, I think, was to Julian Jackson. He was a longtime champion at junior middleweight, and besides the aforementioned names we mentioned of the guys from the '80s, he was blasting the shit out of dudes who had no business being in the ring with him. That's what you're supposed to do with these fucking fringe contenders who you get
Yeah,
put in with. You're
exactly.
supposed to go route them like Shakur Stevenson for
Yeah,
12 rounds.
you can't ask anything more. If you're taking them out like you should, then that's all you can do.
What are you gonna do? Yeah, like guys like Brett Lally and Arturo Gotti's brother, Joe Gotti, and even Troy Waters, who hurt him, and a couple others. Like Norris was taking these guys out in 3 rounds or less, all right, ruthlessly, knocking the shit out of them and then running over them and talking shit to them while they're laying there, like, shaking and having convulsions and stuff.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
got his lopsided high top fade up in their face.
Absolutely. And that, like that's what you're supposed to do to contenders like that. You know what I mean? Guys who don't belong in the ring with you. Spence did that too, to his credit too, when he was welterweight champion. Guy, when he got put in a couple of those scrubs on Showtime, he took them out in the first 2 rounds or so. That's what you're supposed to do with these guys. But that's what made the aura of Norris, was that like he looked angry while he did it. And while Mike Tyson was going to jail and other stuff, like Norris was that kind of like angry guy. We're like, holy shit, man! Like,
Yeah, he kind of filled that role for a minute. Yeah,
absolutely, for to us, yeah, like a smaller dude. Him and Joel McClellan, like A and B for that.
yep. Just
So
angry punchers.
really, like, how did Burt Sugar describe George Foreman? He'd walk in, growl, throw punches, and go home. So it's like, when Simon Brown went in there for that fight, even though he was a former champion, the people thought he was on the back end and he was going to be a sacrificial lamb from Norris. Nah, first, right away, beat him like with a jab in the first round, or what was it, round 1 or round 2, whatever. Caught him with a jab, and you saw Norris's legs, and he went down. And you hear Steve Albert, "Down goes Norris, what a shocker!" Because like I don't think they thought that was almost like a flash knockdown, so they weren't that excited, but they were just kind of like, oh. And then you saw what happened. Norris got bounced around like a fucking ping pong ball that fight.
Yeah, like his legs, like his equilibrium just was never there after he like got hit with that, and then like got hit in the temple or something. Then he was done. Like he just couldn't quite get his legs back after that.
Sure. And so like even Brown was already past it by that point too. People didn't really know. Because he lost a very comprehensive decision to Norris in a rematch. Didn't win a round, I think, in that fight. But then when he fought Vincent Petway, who was a recent IBF champion, junior middleweight champ, they had one of the best firefights in the 90s. Another one that's not talked about enough today, but that fight was incredible. Both guys get knocked down until Brown ends up getting hit with a miracle hook that one.
Oh, dude, they're like losing points left and right because they're
Yeah.
fucking like just it's like one of the dirtiest fights you could watch, that like where nobody gets disqualified because they're like smushing each other in the face and like doing this type of shit and like elbowing. It's like, oh my God,
I
dude.
remember Petway ran after him after one of the rounds of the whatever. I forgot what round it was, but after the bell ended, Petway ran across the ring and spread on that stuff. Like,
Dude, they were mad at each other. I don't know why, but they were mad.
I mean, I think they both came from the same area. I want to say Petway was from that area, from the Maryland area.
You might have
Brown's,
been right. Yeah.
fight was held in DC, and then you have Mike Tyson on commentary calling him Petaway. Oh, Petaway over there, Petaway, But that was a hell of a fight. So, anyways, Brown was just one of those rough and tumble dudes.
Yeah.
And
wild knockout. Wild knockout. Yeah.
so that being said, who do you win? Who do you think would win that?
Man, I mean, I think when Simon Brown stepped up the biggest, unfortunately, usually lost. So I mean, I'd probably go with
Spence?
Charlo. Sorry, but
No, I'm
I
talking about
can't.
Spence again. Spence.
Or sorry, yeah, Spence. I'd probably go with Spence. Yeah, sorry, not Charlo. I'd probably go with Spence. But I mean, like, dude, when you got a guy with power like Simon Brown, that's enough power that you can't like sleep on that kind of guy. You can't think you're going to win that type of fight. But I'd probably go with Spence.
Agreed. I think Spence would win the decision, but it'll be a tough as nails fight.
Yeah, dude, it might be more difficult than people think, but just go look him up on YouTube. He's right there. Could go see him yourself.
Since we're at welterweight, Terence Crawford, the king, Bud.
Man, it's tough, dude. Because especially because like the recency bias, because it just happened, and we're familiar with what Terence Crawford looks like now, so there's going to be a lot of tendency to be like, oh, dude, he's among the all-time greats, and no, he hasn't done anything remotely close to accomplish. He's accomplished a lot, and in terms of skill and in terms of like the eye test or whatever, he looks fantastic, and I think that he would hold his own in any era. Like his skills and his power, he'd be fine. But we're talking about like, is he among like the greatest welterweights of all time? Dude, that's a fucking deep division historically. That's a really deep division. So that's pretty tough, man. So I mean, like, if I'm trying to like think of somebody who's a little bit maybe more like on the level or somebody who like makes a little bit more sense, dude. Um, gosh, that's a ooh. I think I would say this before going to anybody specifically. I think Bud matches up well with the vast majority of fighters, and there probably aren't too many welterweights from history that like take him out easily or something like that. He's got dog in him. He's fucking mean and ruthless when when he's in that mood, and he's a good finisher, a good puncher, very good skills. Fast hands, fast feet. So I don't think he's the type of guy that's just gonna like, oh, Ray Robinson would fuck him up, Ray and two. Like, I don't think so. But
I don't think Ray takes him in two. Ray, I mean, he might go the distance with Ray. Who knows? But I wouldn't pick him to beat Ray Robinson.
yeah,
That's
I
not
don't think there's
against
too
him.
many
I want to pick any
instances where
welterweight to beat Ray Robinson. Whatever. But all right. For instance, the Kings. Well, not besides Hagler.
dude, I think that think he'd probably have, and you might not, people might not like this, but I think he'd have the easiest time with Duran.
Agreed. I would agree with that. Absolutely.
And it's not like I'm
And
saying Duran's bad. It's just stylistically.
if you're gonna go with it, if you're gonna pit Crawford and Duran against each other 3 times, Crawford's gonna beat him at some point, like maybe twice out of that, maybe.
Yeah, I'd
I don't
probably
know.
pick
But
like Crawford twice, Duran once.
The Duran that beat Leonard is gonna be hard to beat anybody in history. You know what I mean? But like,
Totally.
it's that
But
being
Ray
said,
did win some rounds in that fight. It's not like he didn't win rounds. It was a close-ish
and,
fight.
and at the very end of the fight, he had Duran reeling a little bit, like he was coming on. So it's one of those, Um, I agree with you though. I think out of the three, when it comes to styles and everything like that, I think Duran would be the one that he would have the best chance of like getting a win over.
Yeah.
Leonard would be Leonard would be a fascinating fight in a fight that he'd be highly competitive in. It wouldn't be a blowout and anything like that. That would be an intense chess match that everyone would
Yeah.
have to watch and study for years on end, kind of like Tony and Mike McCallum, but even more so. And
Pernell McGirt.
yeah,
Okay, there's no power threat there, but still.
no, and I mean Pernell McGirt is another one that should be studied in a cast of just brilliance. And it's like that would be another one. But I think Leonard and his tenacity. Not to say Crawford doesn't have any tenacity. I mean, the dude clearly is tenacious and mean, and when he has you hurt, like he has a mean dark side to him that just like will rip your head off when he has you. You know what I mean? But the Leonard was just different. I can't
Yeah.
explain it. It's like Leonard can just bring it to another level. They can both get touched, all right. And that's the thing that'll make this fight brilliant too, is that like as good defensively as they are, they weren't just predicated so much on defense. They can be touched. Crawford has shown that he can be touched. Leonard showed that he can be touched back in the day. You know what I mean? Because they were just looking also too like hungry sharks trying to knock your head off as well. And if they had you hurt, they didn't mind taking a punch while they were ready to take your head off. Like it, but I think Leonard can, just ekes. I think Leonard takes him. Hearns Hearns is a bad style matchup for anyone in history. I've always said that. I mean, like he could be beat clearly. Leonard showed that he could be eventually stopped, and I would pick maybe Robinson to beat him too and stuff. But like no one ever outboxed Tommy Hearns. No one. Benitez didn't. Leonard didn't. Nobody did. All right. Um, Hearns just had especially at welterweight, man. Like once he learned how to clinch and just like he became overall just the worst style for anything you can imagine. Like he was so fluid in how beautifully he could box off his jab, everything, the body punch and the lankiness, all that. And then like it just would have been hard. It just would have been an absolute stylistic nightmare for Crawford.
Yeah. And we can't even bring Hagler into that, dude, because that's not fair. Like the
Oh, I'm
size
not.
difference is not.
Everybody wants to bring in Hagler because he ended up fighting all those guys, but like until Crawford proves to me that he's actually going to move up to middleweight or does something of that
Yeah.
nature, then you can bring that up. Until then, I'm not going to mention that. For what's the point?
Nah.
Canelo
No.
won the fight, which is bullshit because I think that was a fight I was kind of looking forward to seeing.
I know, dude. Canelo, time's ticking, bro. I don't know what the fuck he's doing because
Oh, he's
that
too
was
small, bro. You're not that much smaller than like that much bigger than him, really.
that honestly seemed like a far more interesting fight to me than the shit they're kicking around right now. So,
1,000%.
but
Um,
regardless, No, I mean, I think that Crawford goes through most of these eras really well, but it's
He
just
does. If you take all right, that's the golden age from the early 80s, right? Get rid of those guys now. Like Leonard retires for a bit before he comes back. He never came back as a welterweight. Hearns moves up. Duran moves up. So now Crawford would be left with Marlon Starling, Donald Curry, Lloyd Hunnigan, eventually Mark Breland. You know what I mean? Guys like that. I think he beats all those guys.
yeah,
Curry would have been a fascinating fight.
yeah.
Peak
Until he
Curry,
clips him, it would be great.
but I think Crawford ends up clipping him exactly. At some point, he clips
And
him,
Breland too.
and Crawford I think has more dog than Curry too. Curry showed to be himself a tough as nails guy, especially later on in his career when you can see he was already past it, but he still had like enough to like make things really competitive, and he would still show like brief flashes of his past, like against Norris, for instance, right? Norris fight was a really fun fight before Norris, broke him down and beat him up and stopped him. But like there are brief flashes of moments where Curry like, throws those combinations of years ago. And he was so compact in the way he did it. Like he was a brilliant fighter too, like very perfect in how he threw and boxed. So I get it. And he was beating McCallum, for instance, before he got clipped. But like you said, once he gets clipped, that was going to be it. And Crawford would eventually clip him. Starling would have been a good fight, but Starling, so much with his peekaboo defense and stuff like that. I think Crawford switch hitting everything would be able to like beat him on a close but comprehensive decision, and then he would have stopped Breland and he would have stopped Hunnigan.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think that actually what could have been an interesting stylistic matchup, even though I don't know that I don't think I would pick Oscar, but Oscar might have been a weird stylistic matchup for Bud at welterweight.
That would have been a great fight. Absolutely. Thing is too
I
is
know
that
people slag Oscar, dude, and don't get me wrong, I ain't gonna stop you, but he was a good fighter.
Oscar was a great fighter, a great fighter, on the cusp of being an all-time great fighter, and he didn't duck anybody, and he would have fought Crawford. And Crawford, again, he's one of those guys that, like I said, he's a great defensive fighter, but he doesn't mind getting in there and having getting into a firefight. And if a guy like Green Machine, was that who caught him that time? It was right, Green Machine, that dude.
Was it? Oh
I
shit,
don't think it was whoever it was. I can't pronounce his name.
here. Now I'm gonna have to look it up.
Hmm?
Watch. I bet you if I Google who hurt Terence Crawford. Oh,
I
it was
mean,
Indigenous Kavalauskas.
yeah, that's not Green Machine. I don't know.
Was that is that his fucking I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, but that's the dude that hurt him. Yeah. So like Crawford can get caught like in between shots, especially when he wants to start trading with guys. So it's conceivable. Oscar definitely could have caught him, definitely who was a lot better than the guys that Crawford was getting caught by. He definitely hit him. You know what I mean? And I could see Crawford tasting the canvas against Oscar clearly. Less, many great fighters did. No knock on them, no knock on Crawford. But I could see Crawford also too, like with his switch hitting and his adaptability as the fight got on and the rounds got on. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice again. Being able to negate Oscar as Oscar would fade as he would do in late fights. Crawford being able to eke out a very close decision where Oscar say he got robbed afterwards. Totally.
Yeah, you'd see Oscar walking down the hallway after the fight going, damn, thought I won. Damn it.
Yeah,
Fuck.
exactly. But I could totally see Crawford pulling ahead late as Oscar would fade. Mosley
Yeah,
was
I
able
could see that too,
to,
dude.
able to do that too. So totally.
There were a
Um,
couple of those fights where Oscar just, like Corte just barely eked it out and obviously didn't eke it out against Trinidad. Those
yeah.
do count.
I mean, like, think about it. Like, I could see Crawford being Corte. That'd be a great. Even though I'm a huge like Corte fan, I think he would beat him. He definitely would have beat Jose Luis Lopez, even though Lopez would have been dangerous as shit. It's just
Yeah,
Lopez.
fun fighter, but yeah, just a little step below, I think.
Yeah, he wouldn't have done nothing. I mean, like he was too slow. You know what I mean? And ponderous. Um, Trinidad. I favor Crawford at welterweight against Trinidad. To be honest, I think that like again, Trinidad, as good as Tito is, as an all-time great that Tito is and everything, I think that Crawford would
That's
be
not a good
able
style for him.
exactly. and like he wouldn't be running like Oscar did or anything like that. Just like I think you'd be able to pick him apart.
Yeah, it's not a
Um,
good style for him.
Junior middleweight, who knows? It might be a little bit more different because Tito was again a different animal at that point. But 147, where you can tell he was struggling to make weight a little bit and other stuff, and I think that like I think I could see Crawford beating him.
Yeah.
Whitaker depends what type of Whitaker you get. That would be tough. Like
Yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
on
in
that fought Marty
147
McGirt,
wasn't Purnell's best, but
it
he
wasn't
still had a couple good performances there.
absolutely, and that's what I was getting at. Is that like you're talking about the one before the outside the ring activities caught up to him. So like if you catch him around like the Buddy McGirt era, or when he fought Chavez, I don't think Crawford beats him. I mean that Whitaker is as smart as Crawford is. Whitaker is also he just had a brilliant mind. I think he would just take it a step above. Not
Crawford
to
might
say
have
he would.
gotten the yeah, Crawford might have gotten a decision, but I don't think he would have beaten him.
I don't even know if he would have gotten the decision at that point. I'm talking about the early one, but if we're talking about Whitaker who fought Oscar, I think Crawford would beat him by decision.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, Purnell just was, and especially at 147 against like just bigger welterweights, dude. That was
Yeah.
too tough for him. It was
And not only
he
that, though,
was a little too old, a
I
little
think he
too
still
far.
would have made Crawford look bad. Like Crawford definitely wouldn't have
Yeah,
stopped
that's what
him.
I mean. Is even if Crawford wins the decision, he doesn't like beat him. Like he probably wins the decision and is pissed because he didn't get him.
No, yeah, yeah, he doesn't get him, and like it would be like close enough that Whitaker did have his moments and would tag him, and like think of the Tito fight. Like Whitaker, that was the one fight that Whitaker clearly lost, right? And but that being said, there were moments in that fight where, like, again, they show flashes, like old fighters show flashes of brilliance for like a round or two. And there was a round where Tito got tagged with like a bunch of left hands in a row, and Whitaker was just putting it on his ass really quick. You know what I mean? And it was almost like a glimpse of like, fuck, if this dude really just had it back like a few years ago, what he would have done to him right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like again,
dude.
like Curry with Terry Norris. Curry was completely spent by the time he fought Norris, but there were pockets in that fight where he would land like a four punch combination where you were just like, if
Yeah,
this
if
was
this guy were still around.
if this was like the Curry of like the mid '80s right now, Norris would be getting his ass whooped in this fight. Like, yeah,
Yeah, man. Yeah, Curry was definitely one of the fighters who probably and Breland. It's funny you bring them up together because those are two fighters who were both really, really, really good amateurs, and sky was the limit for their potential. And they both did have very good careers as is, but even so, were expected to just go farther with how great they looked for somewhat short period of time. But
yeah.
yeah, dude, Crawford figures in against a lot of these fighters really well, and I think that he probably beats Tito.
I agree. I agree. And like if you go into the '70s too, like he matches up well with anyone in history. Like him and Jose Napoles would have been an absolutely brilliant fight. And
That's a good one.
that would be, oh my God, that would have been a great fight. And I can
Yeah,
see
that's a good one.
from both ways. Like Crawford could bust up Napoles' eyes that he can force a stoppage.
Yeah,
And
he could. Yeah, that's he could get cut. That was his problem.
oh, badly. I mean, his nickname was Butter, but he also cut like fucking butter. So it's like
Yeah, man. What's homeboy Basilio's nephew?
Billy Backus.
Yeah, dude. Fuck, man. These stupid cuts put that guy into the mix. Damn.
Think about that. Billy Backus, I never had to buy a drink for the rest of his life. Never has to buy a drink for the rest of his life because of
Nope.
that.
Yeah, dude. Dude. Yeah, I mean, great, good for him. I mean, he got the win, but
Totally.
yeah, but we saw in the rematch, nah, it wasn't happening.
But I
But
mean, he does match up well. You know what I mean? Even if you're
mhm.
like, whoa, how's Terence Crawford do against Mickey Walker? Crawford is a grappler, like with his wrestling. I could, see him conceivably trying to go arm in arm with a fucking brute like Walker. Who knows?
Yeah, but at his best at welterweight, Mickey Walker was a fucking beast.
And Walker, I'm not saying that Crawford would have beat him. Okay, not at all. Like Walker, I'll say this too. With all the, for whatever reason, it's interesting. Like on all the old magazines I would read as a kid, whenever they would do the head to heads, they would a lot of times favor the current guy to beat like the old timers. Walker, I think, was undefeated in every like head to head he came with in terms of like against like current guys. They always said that Walker would basically, it always ended up with Walker more or less laughing at either Oscar's punches or Whitaker's punches or somebody, and then just beating the shit out of him and mauling them to death, which would happen.
I mean, it's there's video of him. Like we could see him doing it to a whole bunch of fighters, including a bunch of bigger fighters too. So I mean,
Yeah, I mean, a guy that was
it's
tangling with
crazy.
heavyweight 3 times his size is not someone who you want to fuck with. But
He
I'm
was
just saying that
crazy.
Crawford measures well with anyone in history. But I guess we can just go one more division before we're done, right? And then like maybe do a part 2 one day.
Well, I was gonna just do a real brief stop in junior welterweight and say that Costa would have Teofimo Lopez staring up the lights, going, "Do I still got it?"
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
So
he
you got
doesn't. He
Lopez.
At this point, bro, Sandor Martin's giving them business. I don't think he matches up really well with anybody at 140 right now.
So Devin Haney's at 140 now, even though he's the undisputed lightweight champion. Let's just place him there for a minute, right? Um, Devin Haney's at 140. Teofimo's at 140. Those are the young stars of boxing right now, I guess, whatever. I hated when they were trying to like delegate them as the new four kings because clearly, I don't know, none of that shit's really
Yeah,
happening.
we had a lot closer to that at flyweight than those fucking bozos.
Yeah, right. I mean, Haney is fighting Ryan coming up, I guess, in April in Brooklyn or whatever, but whatever.
Better than nothing, but come on, guys.
Seriously. That being said, I can't at this moment safely say that these dudes would be like, do anything with a guy like Aaron Pryor, Cervantes, or anything like that. You know what I mean?
I mean, even fucking Duilio Loy, dude.
Carlos Ortiz.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's a surprisingly deep division in and of
it
itself,
is.
bro.
Junior welterweight Chavez would have,
Nicolino Lachey.
yeah. If you had a dude like Chavez fighting Teofimo, nah, that's not gonna end well. That wouldn't
Absolutely
end well
not,
at all.
dude.
Like,
Absolutely not. And we haven't seen it. I mean, dude, like I know Devin Haney he's very skilled, but like I don't think we've seen enough like high quality performances from him yet to be able to say he matches really up with
Okay, well,
anybody.
here's one actually for you, Devin. I think this would be a stylistically, this would have been a hell of a fight. Devin Haney, Frankie Randall,
Okay, I was gonna say put him in with somebody who can do it.
Frankie Randall.
Uh, Giving Chavez the business 2 times. I don't know, man.
That would be a hell of a fight. Like, I mean, stylistically, they were kind of similar. You know what I mean? Like, both very competent boxers. Randall has more power than absolutely than Devin Haney does. Haney is quicker than Randall was. I think more athletic.
Who was it that
But
we saw? Gosh, my memory is so shot 'cause I smoked too much weed. But fucking, who was it that we saw Devin Haney get hurt by? He had the deer in the headlights looking fucking fighting.
Linares.
Yeah, that's right, dude. And I mean, like, don't get me wrong, because Leonidas is a good fighter. He was a good fighter at one time. But I mean, that does kind of give me pause a little bit. And I know Haney was really struggling to make lightweight, but that does kind of give me a little bit of pause, against anybody who's got any sort of power. I'm kind of like, what's going on there? Gotta ask that question.
I think it would be a really good high level boxing match, like with a lot of skill involved that like people could appreciate and watch, and it wouldn't be boring. I mean, like Haney would maybe would make it boring because he knew the danger that Randall presented, but Randall would be pressing him and would make it a good fight. And I think
Mm.
I would favor Randall. I think
Well, he
like
he wouldn't just be lost in the like, oh, you're moving and jabbing. What do I do?
I mean, no, Randall was a longtime amateur himself. I think he was on the verge of making a 1980 team along that seemed like a bunch of other people back then. Like he was a bad motherfucker, and a guy that was long neglected in terms of being avoided for a title shot for many years. And in fact, Lee Groves, our friend and historian that's been on the show before, I think he told me that he predicted that Randall was going to beat Chavez. When their first fight happened, clearly that happened. So I mean,
Normally,
I'll
I
be
would
like
say whatever, but it's Lee, so I believe him.
totally believe him. And that's one of those things too, is that like that would have been a high level chess match. That would have been a good boxing match to watch. Totally. I would have totally been into watching that. Like these guys they match up well with not some of the all time greats. Like a guy like Pryor was just a rampaging maniac, and God knows what he would do to these kids today. But like, there are like junior welterweights from the past, like Saúl Mambe and others that like would be like really, really interesting fights in terms of like, matchups. And I think Haney and Teofimo could beat some of them. I don't think but like you said, even though the division hasn't been that long, there's been a lot of great fighters in there, some of them all-time greats, a lot of Hall of Famers. and it's just one that's deep for that matter.
Yeah, dude. It is. It's surprisingly deep because it doesn't because it's one of the junior divisions where you're like, oh, it hasn't been that around. It's actually been around a lot longer than you think.
Yeah,
But
there might have been a couple of gaps and stops in between. Okay, we really don't need this division, and then a few years later, someone was just kind of like, "Wait, no one's claimed this shit." It's just kind of sitting. Well, I'm the champ.
yeah, totally. Were you gonna say lightweight before I said that?
Yeah, but I mean, go junior welterweight was a good stopping pit. I'm trying to think. Was there anyone else at junior welterweight right now?
Subriel
Yes.
Matias.
Who would he match up well with in history? I mean, like he matches up well with anyone in terms of fun fights. Not to say that he would win them. Him and Pryor. Oh my God, that would have been a fun firefight for a
Yeah,
few.
like somebody who just doesn't stop coming forward. Yeah,
Him and
no
Pryor.
question.
Him and Aaron Pryor.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Pryor ends up not stopping him absolutely, but like 4 or 5 rounds of that shit would have been awesome.
yeah, just put him in against anybody who's coming forward, or for that matter, put him in against somebody who's not coming forward, like a Loche. I love those kind of style matchups where it's like a
Oh
massive.
God, I don't know. Loche would have won one. I don't know how many 15 rounds.
Well, I
I'm
mean, not
not an expert, but yeah.
somebody like that. He would have won, but like those kinds of matchups where you put in like a puncher who's willing to like chase a guy down versus a guy who's trying to run away. I like that shit. I think it's funny.
Oh, totally. Like, I mean, the one fight that I always wish I could watch that's not filmed is the second Pep Sadler fight. Just because of that, clearly. Like they say that's Pep's best performance, right? But they also said that Pep came out of that mask of blood. He's
Yeah,
just got
dude, you
some
see
shit.
post-fight photos and he looks like shit.
But they said he put on the most brilliant performance of his career in that fight. And so I'm
Well,
just
we
like,
mentioned Sandy Sadler on a couple other shows. The dude
yeah.
was a monster and he was
Yeah,
dirty.
so it's like it makes me want to like, see something like you said, what I mean? Like the monster chasing down the other guy who's just pecking and boxing, but like, the sand is slipping away in the glass at that point before
Yep.
they finally drown. Because there's only so much movement you can do before the guy finally corners you and starts, like Antonio Margarito, how he would do it, Pat, another
Yeah.
guy, that more modern style, but totally. But I mean, I love Matias because he makes for fun fights against anybody. He really does. He's just one of those like bruisers and brawlers. And like, if you want to do more modern, not a guy like Pryor, because Pryor, again, like I said, would have blasted him. Him and Costa Zoo would have been a fun fight. Like Zoo, I think, again, too technical would end up stopping him, but that would have been an absolute fucking firefight. Him and Zab Judah would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, dude, especially at 140 pounds. Like Zab was
Oh, fuck
actually,
yeah.
I mean, the zoo fight is obviously a bad representation, but when he was actually good, he looked good.
Yeah. And Zoo, I gotta give Zab credit too, because like people say, oh, if you like broke him down too much, he fall apart. Like to his credit, when Matisse, Lucas Matisse was on the run and was on the come up and stuff like that, he fought him, beat him, went to decision with him, was getting his ass kicked near the end of it, still survived it. You know what I mean? Like Zab was tough as nails. Vince Phillips would have been a good fight for Matias as well. But
Yeah, homeboy Carlos Baldemir beat him up for several rounds and he didn't quit. Like he didn't bow out. He took his
yeah,
ass kicking.
exactly. So, you know. But yeah, I guess the last one, like lightweight, right?
Yeah,
So
which is at this point just Tank and Shakur Stevenson. And I don't even know if Tank's still planning on fighting there or what. I don't know.
I mean, how does Tank measure up? Tank, well, people love him. He's a polarizing figure, I guess, and all this stuff. I can't put him in
Same
with a
problems with the Canelo matchup.
hmm?
Same
Yeah,
problems with Canelo matchups. His output is low. He's
yeah,
he's a precision puncher, obviously, and if he catches just about anybody at lightweight, I think that there's a real good chance they're going to sleep. But
even Duran,
what's that?
even Duran.
If he catches them with his best shot,
Yeah,
I'm not. I mean, dude,
I mean
Tank's
did get dropped by DeJesus, and he's been
and
knocked. I
and
can't. Yeah,
Tank's a massive puncher. But I don't think Duran is just he's not going to sit there and fall into those traps is the problem. And Tank is really good at setting traps, really good at walking you into his counters, and he's a massive counter puncher. Duran's not going to fall for that shit at lightweight. That's
yeah,
the big problem, and the problem is that Tank doesn't have the output to fix the other side of that. So if a fighter's just overwhelming him, what the fuck's he gonna do? And we've already seen, and granted, it was only for short periods of time, but we've already seen other fighters manage to push him up against the ropes and work him
Yep.
over a little bit and win rounds. That's you can't, dude. Come on, bro. I like Tank as much as anybody. I do as a fighter, emphasizing only as a fighter. But I mean, like, dude, you can't be that inactive from round to round. And then, no, dude.
I 1000% agree.
Big power, good skill, not enough action. And he hasn't fought for almost a year, so we don't even know what the fuck's happening with him.
Yeah. In terms of like dream fights, again, like Duran, that would just be bad. Duran would beat the daylights out of him and do
Lightweight's
whatever.
a deep division, bro.
It really, really is. And it's funny too because that Whitaker article that I went through way, way back, we're talking, it was like in World Boxing or something back in like 95. They said that Whitaker would have beat Joe Gans. He would have stopped Benny Leonard on cuts. He would have beat Canzoneri.
Yeah, okay.
He would have beat Ike Williams. I think they said he would have lost to Duran. But like, it was just funny. Like they had him basically going through all of lightweight in history, you know. But I can't
Maybe.
I like I'm not even gonna go back to a person like Duran because but like if you want to go to like Whitaker, for instance, like lightweight Whitaker just would have been too much for him. And
Even with the boring style,
yeah,
Whitaker still outwork him.
he would. Because Whitaker really wasn't that boring. Like he just didn't punch. Like he couldn't punch that. I mean, like he was a sharp puncher,
Yeah,
but
he didn't have power. That's all.
yeah. And he just, so a lot of his fights did win the distance. And as he got bigger, I mean, like, oh, he's running and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, Whitaker was a precise body puncher, his jab, everything. He just would have negated Tank, That's how it would have went down. Tank Camacho would have been interesting. Like lightweight, I'm talking pre-Rosario Camacho. And
I
again, though,
mean,
that Camacho would have beat him because
I think
Camacho,
so, dude.
before Camacho got caught by Rosario,
Yeah,
again,
he decided right in that moment, not
yeah.
this kind of fighter anymore.
But before then, I mean, Camacho was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Where he had some guys comparing him to Ray Robinson, Mike Katz, for instance, and a couple others. I mean, I'm rolling my
Well,
eyes
of
at
course, he's a New York guy, so you know.
but I mean, like that was the type of things that Camacho. I mean, like when you watch Camacho back then, all right, like he did look something special. I mean, like Bazooka Limon by 83, he was already past it with the Chacon fights and everything like that. He was probably already past it, but like Camacho ravaged him, absolutely ravaged him for his first world belt, for his first world title. And then when he fought, what was it, Jose Luis Ramirez for the WBC strap, and what was it, 84 or something. Um, Ramirez is one of those dudes. Clearly, yeah, he was slower than Camacho and everything like that, but he gave everybody hell. The only dude at that point that really blew him out was a fucking Ruben Olivares when he was like a novice pro fighter. And he even gave Alexis Arguello hell in a fight that like some people thought he beat him in. So it's like, Ramirez was just fucking tough, teak tough. Camacho routed him in that fight, dropped him, slapped him around, did what he wanted. Ramirez couldn't lay a glove on him. At that point, I could see why people were thinking that Camacho could be an all-time great. Like he was brilliant. And that Camacho runs over Tank and he runs over fucking Shakur. Like he was just a different beast, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But that's not
dude.
a knock on them. It's just it is what it is. I think one fight that would have been absolutely fascinating for that era. I mean, that could have been absolutely fascinating. Is Tank against Rosario?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, that could have been fun, dude, for sure. That fucking that guy, first of all, a fairly underrated puncher. I mean, well, okay, he's on a
Edwin
couple puncher
Rosario.
lists. So, what's that?
Edwin Rosario.
Yeah.
I see. You think he's underrated for
Well,
puncher?
just in the sense that he was a pretty good puncher that doesn't really seem to get a whole lot of recognition.
Yeah.
But he
Okay.
was tricky as fuck, pretty dirty, very skilled. I mean, he was a tough knight at his best for just about anybody.
He would be, man. And
And
Tank,
Mike Tyson's best friend.
yes, came from the Caton the Caton group. But Rosario was one of those dudes that like even though he threw more than Tank, like he had enough openings and like in his style and stuff like that that you could be caught
He
and you
could.
could get exposed. Like Howard Davis was outboxing him for a number of rounds before his chin gave out on him in the last round. He lost that decision, and he could be hurt too for that matter. Even though like he was never really dropped, which was weird, he could get like knocked silly and like he would stay on his feet, but he would like clearly be out of sorts while he would just kind of get knocked from one side of the ring to the other. Like Ramirez did that to him. When he lost his junior welterweight crown a few years later to what was that? Akinobu Hironaka, I think.
Mm.
Um, Same thing. Hironaka just kind of bum rushed him in the first round, and before you knew it, poor Rosario looked like a drunk stumbling from one side of the ring to the other. Like he had no clue what the fuck was going on. So that could potentially happen. Like he could get hit and you can get hurt, and Tank could, explode on him and like really hurt him. So that would just be one of those like fascinating contrasts. Him and Roger Mayweather, for instance, could have been a very interesting fight.
Yeah, dude, for sure. That was another instance of a guy who was a good puncher, but just not a super great chin, but
Yeah.
also good skills, fast, good footwork.
And I think Tank would stop Mayweather because again, like Mayweather couldn't
Probably
take a punch, and eventually he would go walk into some shit and he would get flattened. Rocky
like the
Lockridge
Pineda
would have
fight.
been,
Yeah,
yeah, Rocky Lockridge would have been really fascinating to watch too.
that's a good one. Yeah,
Um, I'm just thinking of like more modern guys from like the '80s. I'm not gonna go all the way back to like Barney Ross or something right now, but like, because those, I'm sorry, man, Barney Ross would slap the shit out of Tank. Like, and I'm not even like, oh, it's old people. Just watch the footage and everything like that. Styles make fights, and it's just, yeah,
dude, I
but.
think that's the issue with like even with Shakur Stevenson too. Even though he's less of an issue with his output, both Shakur Stevenson and Tank, I think their styles are vulnerable to somebody who's really strong, can take a punch, and has a good output. And unfortunately, that's a
Won't be
lot of
afraid of,
lightweights from history, dude.
yeah, and not gonna be afraid of what's gonna be thrown back to them, even though they know
Exactly.
they're
That's the
not worried
fucking
about
thing.
it. Like, they just know that like once they taste it a couple of times, like, okay, fine. Like I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
some of these dudes are just getting like lulled into like, oh, he's punching me, like, and it's
like
there are
you think
so
if a
many.
Henry Armstrong, for instance, fights Tank, and like Tank lands one of those whipping uppercuts, and yes, he might wobble Armstrong's legs a little bit, but you think that's gonna deter him from coming in there and just grinding in his
Yeah,
ass?
is that going to make him go, oh, he hit me, I'm not going to do that again? Is going to go, no, I'm going to do it
Yes,
again, but like harder. I
word.
mean,
Like,
and that's the difference is that like some of these guys are being convinced to stay back when
yeah.
there are a lot of fighters from history who wouldn't have done that.
All right, here's a good one: Arguello
Mm. Versus Tank,
and Shakur.
Arguello for both. I mean, I'm biased. I like Arguello, so I mean, but to be fair, they would have openings, both of them, because Arguello did have probably a little bit more than a handful of performances that either weren't good or where he looked kind of flat.
And don't get mad at me, fans, for saying this, but but Tank, not Tank, Shakur could have a chance of outpointing him on an off night for Arguello. Think about that, and the reason why I say that, Vilomar Fernandez.
That's what I'm saying is there were a couple of
Fernandez
performances where
beat
he just kind of
Fernandez beat Arguello by decision. Arguello, look, I don't know if Shakur would be active enough to out hustle Arguello, so I maybe I'll go back on that. I don't know, but like he's skilled enough to make Arguello look bad. Absolutely, make him definitely
he
look like off guard.
Arguello chased the knockout sometimes. Sometimes he did
And
that,
he was
yeah.
flat-footed. He was
Hmm.
another guy that kind of shuffled. Like he had to be really set on his feet. He wasn't quick-footed. Like his hands weren't even that super fast either. Like he was precision, incredible with his precision. Everything about him was textbook and one of the greatest fighters ever for all what he did. And if you got into him with combinations, like you weren't gonna beat him in terms of textbook shit. But like he could be out hustled if you just moved around him and try to like make him look
Yeah.
bad. Like he could you know.
Yeah, you could figure his timing out, and I've watched a lot of his, well, probably all of his fights that are available. But unfortunately, as much as I like him, he's one of those fighters where um, he does that thing where he steps back and then goes,
Yeah, yeah, and
and
like
I'm just like, dude, that's such. I hate when fighters do that. It's such wasted movement, and it's a real bad habit that they just cannot break from. I don't know if it's amateur or what, but he used to do that bouncing thing. Barrera used to do it constantly, fucking, and that's the kind of thing where if you could figure out the timing on that, you're cooked, bro. You can't fucking counter off that.
and
So
that's why I used to
anyway,
think Floyd would, and that's why I would always say that Floyd would have beaten Arguello in a head-to-head. Like Styles make fights, and I think
yeah,
Floyd, just would have out hustled him and outboxed him.
he could have.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I know that we missed like especially probably the big one that we missed, if anybody, is Naoya Inoue. But let's just say he beats everybody from history. Let's just go ahead and
I
say
mean,
he
like
beats everybody.
I know that was a lot. All right, let's just do this one before we go because this is one I was thinking about, and I think I brought up on Twitter after he beat Fulton. And Inoue Wilfredo Gomez.
Wilfredo Gomez was obviously a great puncher, but not only a great puncher, he was skilled. He
Yeah,
could get caught, but he was mean. He was mean. So
nasty fighter, nasty.
he was mean. Like he wanted to hurt his opponent. I mean, I'd probably go with Inoue
Had an
because I think
arrogance
he's
too.
sharper, but and I think that would probably be a problem for Gomez, who could be caught, who could be cut,
Yeah.
who could be hurt, and he could also get sucked into a brawl too. But that would probably be a pretty tough night for Inoue, dude. And plus, on top of that, for now, that's the ceiling that we've seen weight wise for Inoue,
That's
and
what I was
against
gonna
a
say.
really good puncher, that could be real dangerous.
I would have to agree with you. I think I'm gonna slightly favor Inoue still. Like
Yeah, but not with a
Gomez
lot
is
of confidence. Yeah,
exactly. Gomez was brilliant. Gomez is one of the greatest boxer punchers I've ever watched. I mean, that dude was so fluid in the way he attacked, and his defense was really good too, and all that. But like you said, Pat, he was arrogant and he was nasty about it. And he knew that he was a dominant dude, and he was like spiteful about the way he would beat the shit out of you and just like happy. You know, Derek Holmes beat him as an amateur in the World Championships. I think knocked
oh
him out in the
god,
first round. And when they finally had a rematch as pros when Gomez was champion and Holmes was the undefeated young contender, that is the one of the most disgusting, vicious beatdowns you will ever see in the modern. Well, is 1980 even still the modern era? I
I
guess.
mean, kind of, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
kind of.
pushing the referee out of the way to whoop his ass more type of shit.
I mean, but it was Gomez was almost on some harking back to some Jack Dempsey shit, like just really beating him, almost wanting to spit on him while he was down.
Like, how
And
dare you for fucking beating me 7 years ago or
yeah,
whatever?
and as we found out, Holmes had his jaw broken, like teeth split down, like it was a nasty thing to it. I don't even know how he was able to survive that as long as he did. Well, Gomez was just every time he hit him, nasty shit. But that being said, Inoue has shown that he could take a punch. I mean, it wasn't that 122 when he got crocked by Donaire, but Donaire is shown to be one of the hardest punching little guys in
Yeah, he's
history.
already gone up to featherweight and shown he has power there. So
Like Donaire has shown, especially in his left hand, he's one of the hardest punching little guys in boxing history. And not only did Inoue take that, he also had his eye socket broken, like in that fight, didn't he?
yeah, that's where he still has it's his eyelids still like that because he got his
Yeah.
eye fucked up.
And think about that. He survived that and won that fight and still ended up dropping Donaire late. Like, his reflexes, his twitching, everything like that. He's my favorite active fighter, man. Like I can see him being an all-time great. Like he's brilliant, just fucking brilliant. And him and Gomez head to head are just almost stacked up together. Like just boom, 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 boom. You can't really push them apart. The only thing I will say, and this is what makes me think there could be a difference here, is that, like you said, Gomez had a tendency to bust up easy. He really did.
Yeah,
Like he had the bone structure in the face that um he broke apart. You know what I mean? When Salvador
and
Sanchez
swelled up.
came
Yeah,
up, Sanchez had his face looking like a gargoyle. The Lupe Pinto fight, one of the greatest junior featherweight fights in history. He After that fight, boy, he looked like a raccoon. You know what I mean? Like his eyes were just completely black, swollen up right there, slits, everything. Like he was really damaged, and I think that Inoue's precision punching would bust up Gomez enough to force a stoppage late.
yeah, and
In
Inoue
a
is
brilliant
just
punch. Really,
yeah,
brilliant.
just a little bit less wild, like you said, precision. I think
Yeah.
that's the name of the game here, dude. And obviously, again, I bring up recency bias because he's a fighter who's active now, so we've seen a lot of him. God damn, he's fucking good.
He is. Absolutely. I love watching him fight, man. He's just the way he just come pop, 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 like everything is just so good about him, man. He's just such a natural.
Fuck, dude, we went on for a long time. This is gonna be a long show,
I
but
mean,
and
hopefully people stay with it.
I
This
hope
is
so because I mean it was fun, dude. You know, it's all about fun. I don't think any of us, either of us, are saying that this is a definitive thing that none of these fighters can beat anybody or anything like that. But
just
it's
talking
all
shit.
just for fun,
Yeah.
just for fun. But hey, dude, I appreciate you being here with me, man, doing this discussion. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you listening in. Go and subscribe on the podcast apps. And also, if you watched on YouTube, thank you as well. And subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a comment and ratings and all those yummy, nice things. We'll maybe get back to you at some point. But as far as social media goes, my boy Aris Pina's on Twitter/X as Punch Zone Aris. I'm there as Boxing History, of course. And the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is both on Instagram and Facebook. If you're interested in heading there, go ahead there, say hello, and Eris, we'll talk soon, bro.
Have a good one, yeah.